Hey everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Planet Time. It's so good to have you here. This is our little corner of the internet for calm curiosity, a quiet place where we can explore the big, and sometimes strange, questions about our world, our universe, and ourselves. We try to do it in a way that feels less like a lecture, and more like a late-night conversation with a good friend, when the rest of the world has gone to sleep. So, I have been thinking about something lately, a question that's both wonderfully simple and incredibly complex. It's this: what if our story, the great sprawling story of humanity, isn't a straight line? We're so used to thinking of history as a single, continuous book, starting with chapter 1 and moving forward, page by page, until we arrive at today. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if, instead, our story is a whole library of books, where each volume tells a similar tale of discovery and creation, but every so often, the library burns down. And after the smoke clears, the survivors have to start a new book from scratch, with only a few charred, fragmented pages from the last one to guide them. What if we've been here before? Not just once or twice, but many times. What if humanity has been reset? It's a pretty big thought to hold, isn't it? It changes the way you look at things. I wonder what you're up to at this very moment as you're listening to this. Maybe you're on a quiet walk with your headphones in, and the evening air is just starting to cool. Perhaps you're sitting by a window, watching the rain trace patterns on the glass. Or maybe you're just getting your day started. The smell of coffee is in the air, and the sun is finding its way through your window. Whatever you're doing, wherever you are in the world, I hope you're feeling comfortable and at peace. Just take a deep breath. Let's let the noise of the day fade away for a little while, and just be curious together. Have you ever stood in a place of great antiquity? A place like the stone circles of England, the deep jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, or the soaring temples along the Nile? If you have, you might know the feeling I'm talking about. It's a sense of profound awe, but it's often mixed with a subtle, quiet confusion. You look at these magnificent structures, built with stones that weigh tens, sometimes hundreds, of tons, fitted together with a precision that would challenge our own modern technology, and the official story just doesn't seem to match the reality in front of your eye. There's a whisper in the back of your mind that says, there's more to this story. It's a feeling that a piece of the puzzle is missing, a huge, important piece. It's like finding a beautifully crafted, fully functional smartphone in a sealed tomb from the 1920s. It simply doesn't fit the timeline we've been given. It forces you to question everything you thought you knew. The story we're usually told is one of steady, linear progress. Humans began as simple hunter-gatherers. Then, we cleverly discovered agriculture, which allowed us to settle down. Villages grew into towns, towns into cities, and cities into the great empires of history. From there, it was a slow upward climb through ages of iron and steam, all the way to our current age of information and space exploration. It's a neat, tidy, and encouraging story. It makes sense. But the problem is, the evidence on the ground, the story written in the rocks and ruins of our own planet, tells a much stranger and far less linear tale. That straight line of progress begins to look more like a chaotic scribble when you look closely. It's full of strange gaps, mysterious silences in the archaeological record that last for thousands of years. We call them Dark Ages, a convenient label for times we don't understand. But what if they were something more? What if they weren't just periods of stagnation, but were the aftermaths of a great forgetting? A time when the slate was wiped clean. We see this with the Great Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC. This was a thriving, interconnected world of powerful empires, from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia. They had trade, diplomacy, literature, and incredible art. And then, in the span of a single generation, they were all gone. Wiped off the map. Died. Cities were burned and abandoned, writing systems were forgotten, and entire populations vanished. It was so total that parts of the world were plunged into a darkness that lasted for centuries. How does that happen? How does an entire world, a globalized civilization, simply forget how to be itself? And then, there are the things we find that shouldn't exist at all. We find places like Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey. Discovered only recently, it has completely shattered our understanding of the past. It is a vast, sophisticated temple complex with massive T-shaped pillars, weighing up to 20 tons each, covered in intricate carvings of animals and symbols. According to carbon dating, it was built over 11,500 years ago. That's more than 6,000 years before Stonehenge, and even 7,000 years before the first pyramids in Egypt. The truly mind-bending part is who supposedly built it. Mainstream archaeology tells us it was constructed by nomadic hunter-gatherers, people who hadn't even invented pottery yet, let alone metal tools or writing. This is the equivalent of finding out that the first ever campfire was used to forge the components for a nuclear reactor. It represents a sudden, inexplicable leap in technological and organizational ability that simply has no precedent. It's a ghost from a past we didn't know existed. So, if we entertain this idea, if humanity has been reset, what was the reset button? The answer, it seems, might be all around us. Our planet is not the gentle, stable cradle we often imagine it to be. It has violent moods. It has powerful rhythms and cycles that operate on timescales far beyond a single human life. We live on the thin, fragile crust of a dynamic and sometimes catastrophic world. We have geological evidence for events so powerful they could have easily thrown a burgeoning global civilization back into the Stone Age. Around 12,800 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, the Earth was steadily warming. The great ice sheets were retreating. And then, suddenly, something happened. The climate was plunged back into a deep, brutal freeze that lasted for over 1,000 years. This event, known as the Younger Dryas, was swift and devastating. We do not know for sure what caused it, perhaps a comet impact or a series of impacts, but we know it corresponds with the mass extinction of most of North America's large mammals and the disappearance of a prehistoric culture known as the Clovis people. Could this have been one of the rests? A global cataclysm that forced the survivors back to square one? And it's not just impacts from space. There have been supervolcanic eruptions, like the Toba event in Indonesia about 75 years ago. It was an explosion so colossal, it blocked out sunlight around the globe for years, triggering a volcanic winter and nearly wiping our species off the face of the Earth. Geneticists believe that the entire human population was reduced to just a few thousand individuals, a tiny fragile group on the brink of extinction. We survived. We bounced back. But what knowledge, what culture, what history might have been lost in that desperate struggle for survival? These aren't theories. They are scientifically accepted events in our planet's history. We are a species with amnesia, living in the quiet aftermath of ancient storms. But maybe the memories aren't gone completely. Maybe they're just hidden. What if they survive, not in textbooks, but in our oldest and most sacred stories? Have you ever paused to wonder why almost every culture on Earth, from the ancient Hebrews to the Incas in Peru, from the Aboriginals of Australia to the tribes of North America, has a myth about a great flood? A story of a previous world of arrogant, advanced people who were wiped out by a world-drowning deluge, with only a handful of righteous survivors left to start the world anew. How could so many cultures, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all independently invent the exact same story? Perhaps they didn't invent it. Perhaps they were all describing a real, shared memory of a genuine event, passed down through countless generations, becoming myth and legend along the way. These stories often speak of more than just floods. The ancient texts of India describe vast cycles of time called yugas, stretching over millions of years, in which humanity rises to incredible golden ages of enlightenment, only to descend into darkness and chaos before the world is destroyed and reborn. The Hopi people of Arizona speak of previous worlds that our ancestors inhabited. The first world was destroyed by fire, the second by ice, and the third by water. They believe we are living in the fourth world now, and that its fate is yet to be decided. Are these just fanciful tales to entertain children? Or are they a kind of cultural time capsule, a way for our distant ancestors to tell us, this has all happened before? It is a lot to consider, I know. It is a deep and winding path we are about to walk down. And as we begin this journey, if these questions are sparking something in you, that same sense of wonder and curiosity, you can help our sleepy little signal find its way through the noise to other people who might be wondering about these things too. A simple like on the video, or a quiet subscription to the channel, is like a little boost, a gentle nudge that helps our conversation reach across the digital quiet to find other curious minds who are looking for a calm place to wonder. Over the course of our time together in this documentary, we are going to peel back these layers, one by one. We're going to look at the stunning archaeological anomalies, the out-of-place artifacts, the impossible engineering, the ancient astronomical alignments that hint at a lost science and a forgotten technology. We will journey through the Earth's catastrophic past, examining the evidence for the natural cycles that may have served as humanity's reset button. We will listen closely to the echoes in stone and story, treating the myths and legends of our ancestors not as simple fiction, but as the potential eyewitness accounts of survivors. We will explore the anthropological puzzles, the sudden, inexplicable leaps in human consciousness, language, and culture that defy the slow, gradual process of evolution. This exploration isn't about dismissing science or history. It is about expanding it. It's about having the courage to say, what if we do not know the whole story? The idea of our past being a series of cycles, of rises and falls, can feel deeply unsettling. It can make our own modern civilization, with all its incredible achievements, feel fragile and temporary. But I find it can also be strangely and profoundly comforting. It suggests that, at the very core of the human spirit, there is a resilience that is almost indestructible. It means that no matter how far we fall, we always get back up. No matter what is lost, something is always remembered. No matter how devastating the fire, new green shoots always find their way through the ashes. The story continues. So that's the possibility we are holding together today. The idea that we are not the first advanced civilization on this planet. That our gleaming cities and global networks are perhaps just the latest draft in a story that has been written, erased, and rewritten many times before. I invite you now to get comfortable. Settle into your chair, or if you are walking, just focus on the rhythm of your steps. Let the demands of the world fade into the background for just a little while. We aren't here to find all the answers tonight. In fact, we might end up with more questions than we started with. And that's okay. Because tonight, we are just here to wonder. Let's begin. The story of us, the story of humanity, is one we think we know. It is a simple, comforting tale we are told in school. It starts in darkness, with small bands of hunter-gatherers huddled around a fire. Then, slowly, surely, the line of progress begins to climb. We discover farming, we build villages, then towns, then cities. We invent writing, we forge empires, we learn the secrets of science. It's a straight line, an arrow shot from the Stone Age directly to the Space Age, with us standing proudly at its peak. It's a good story. It's neat. It's tidy. The only problem is, it might not be true. Because when you look closely at that clean, straight line of human history, you start to see things that do not quite fit. You see gaps. Strange, empty spaces where there should be answers. You find chapters that feel like they are missing pages, or pages written in a language we've completely forgotten how to read. It is in these quiet, dusty corners of our past that a different story begins to emerge. Not a straight line, but something else entirely. A story of staggering heights and devastating falls. A story of forgetting. Let's start with a place that simply shouldn't exist. In the rolling hills of modern-day Turkey, there's a site that has quietly rewritten the first chapter of human civilization. It is called Göbekli Tepe. For decades, we believed we knew how society started. First came agriculture. People settled down, grew crops, and raised animals. This stability gave them the free time and the resources to build permanent structures, to develop religion, and to create complex culture. It was a neat, logical sequence. Farming, then settlement, then temples. Göbekli Tepe turns that entire idea on its head. Archaeologists digging there uncovered something astonishing. Massive, T-shaped pillars of stone, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in perfect, beautiful circles. These stones are covered in intricate carvings of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, all rendered with a skill and artistry that is breathtaking. It is clearly a temple, a place of immense spiritual importance, a sacred gathering spot built with incredible effort and planning. The mystery isn't what it is, but one it is from. Göbekli Tepe is almost 12,000 years old. Let that number sink in for a moment. 12,000 years. This is 7,000 years before the pyramids of Giza. It is 6,000 years before Stonehenge. This was built at the end of the last ice age, a time when we thought our ancestors were living simple, nomadic lives, chasing mammoths with stone-tipped spears. According to our old timeline, the people who built this shouldn't have had the organization, the specialized labor, or even the abstract thought required for such a monumental project. And most importantly, this was all built before the invention of agriculture. It's like finding a perfectly preserved smartphone buried in your great-grandmother's attic, tucked away in a dusty chest from the 1920s. Your first reaction isn't just surprise. It's a deep, unsettling confusion. It doesn't fit the story you know. It forces you to ask 1,000 new questions. Did they have help? Where did they get the idea? And if they had this, what else did they have that we do not know about? Göbekli Tepe suggests that a mysterious, sophisticated culture existed, built something world-changing, and then vanished. The site was intentionally, carefully, buried under tons of earth around 80 BC. They didn't just abandon it, they entombed it, preserving it like a time capsule. Why? We have no idea. The people who built it, their language, their beliefs, their reason for burying their own magnificent creation, it is all lost to time. It is a brilliant flash of light in a period we thought was complete darkness. A whole chapter of the human story that was lived, written, and then completely erased. And it's not the only thing that doesn't fit. All over the world, we find these little breadcrumbs of mystery, what some people call out-of-place artifacts. These are objects, tools, and technologies that appear in layers of the earth where, by all conventional understanding, they have no business being. They are the proverbial screws in the coal seam, the modern-looking hammer found encased in 400-million-year-old rock. While many of these can be explained away, some remain genuine puzzles that challenge our assumptions. Think of the intricate, precise stone boxes in the Serapeum of Saqqara in Egypt, cut from single blocks of granite with a precision that would challenge our own modern machinery. Or the countless megalithic structures across the globe, from Peru to Lebanon, where enormous stones are fitted together so perfectly, without mortar, that you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. We look at these achievements, and we offer simple explanations. We say they used sand and water and immense manpower. And perhaps they did. But it doesn't quite quiet the feeling of awe, the nagging question in the back of our minds. How did they know how to do that? Where did that perfect knowledge of engineering and acoustics and astronomy come from, only to disappear for thousands of years before being painstakingly rediscovered? It feels less like a steady climb of progress and more like finding the ruins of a brilliant laboratory, long abandoned, with its most advanced secrets lost to the wind. It whispers of a past where our ancestors knew things that we, for a very long time, forgot. This pattern of rise, fall, and forgetting isn't just theoretical. It is not just hinted at by strange artifacts or impossibly old temples. We have seen it happen. We have a clear, well-documented example of a massive global reset in our own history. We call it the Bronze Age collapse. Imagine the world around 1250 BC. It was a vibrant, interconnected place. The great empires of the Egyptians, the Hittites in Anatolia, the Mycenaean Greeks, the Babylonians in Mesopotamia, they were global superpowers. They had complex trade routes stretching for thousands of miles. They exchanged goods, letters written on clay tablets, and royal ambassadors. They had literature, art, architecture, and sophisticated legal systems. It was, in many ways, the first great international age. It was a world that felt stable, powerful, and permanent. And then, in the span of less than 100 years, it all burned. From roughly 12,000 to 150 BC, civilization in the eastern Mediterranean simply collapsed. Major cities were violently destroyed and abandoned, one after another. Palaces were burned to the ground. Entire writing systems vanished. The complex trade networks that formed the backbone of the economy disintegrated. Literacy itself disappeared from regions like Greece for centuries. They literally forgot how to read and write. Think about that. The knowledge, the culture, the identity of these powerful empires, built up over 1,000 years, was wiped out in a single generation. It was a catastrophe so profound that it plunged the entire region into a dark age that lasted for over 300 years. All that was left were fragmented memories, myths of a golden age of heroes and gods, the stories that would eventually become the Trojan War epics. The reality of that world was forgotten. Historians still debate the exact cause. Was it a perfect storm of earthquakes, drought, and famine? Was it waves of mysterious invaders known only as the Sea Peoples? Was it internal rebellion? The most likely answer is that it was all of the above, a series of cascading failures where one crisis amplified the next until the entire system broke down. Whatever the cause, the result was a hard reset. When civilization finally re-emerged from the darkness centuries later, it had to start over in many ways. It had to rediscover long-distance trade. It had to reinvent writing systems. It had to rebuild complex societies from the ground up. The memory of the glorious world that came before was gone. It was a great forgetting. So when we look at our past, we are not seeing a straight line. We're seeing cycles. We see Göbekli Tepe, a brilliant spark of ingenuity that appears and then vanishes into a long silence. We see the lost knowledge hinted at by impossible artifacts. We see the very real, very complete collapse of the Bronze Age world. The evidence doesn't point to a steady, unbroken march of progress. It points to a rhythm, a pattern of rise and fall. It's a pattern of civilizations reaching incredible heights of complexity and knowledge, only to be brought low by some catastrophe, losing almost everything in the process. The survivors are left to pick up the pieces, their inheritance reduced to myths and legends. They begin the long, slow climb again, perhaps unaware that they are walking a path that has been walked many times before. It's a much more humbling, and perhaps a more realistic view of our own story. It suggests that progress isn't guaranteed. It suggests that knowledge is fragile and can be lost far more easily than it is gained. It suggests that we are not necessarily the pinnacle of a long, unbroken chain, but perhaps just the latest wave in a very old ocean. This changes the question entirely. We stop asking, how did we get so advanced? And we start asking a much more profound and unsettling question. If civilizations can rise to great heights and then vanish, if entire worlds can be forgotten, how many times has it happened before? And if this is a natural cycle, a pattern woven into the fabric of human existence, then what is the force that drives it? Is it a flaw within ourselves, a tendency to grow too complex, too fragile, until we inevitably collapse? Or is the reset button not in our hands at all? Is it possible that the Earth itself, the very planet we live on, has its own cycles of creation and destruction? That the stage on which our story plays out is occasionally and violently cleared for a new act to begin? The answers, it seems, may not be buried in our cities, but in the ice, the rock, and the very climate of our world. That the stage on which our story plays out is occasionally and violently cleared for a new act to begin. The answers, it seems, may not be buried in our cities, but in the ice, the rock, and the very climate of our world. It's an unsettling idea, but also a profound one. It suggests that history isn't just shaped by us, by kings and queens, inventors and explorers. It's also shaped by a force far older and more powerful than any empire we could ever build. That force is the Earth itself. Think of it like your computer. When a program freezes or the system gets too slow, sometimes the only solution is a hard restart. Everything is wiped from the active memory, and the system boots up fresh. What if our planet does the same thing? What if it has a catastrophe cycle, a natural reset button that it pushes every now and then, forcing life to start again? It's not angry, it's not malicious. It's just a system running its own, very ancient program. To understand this, we need to travel back in time. Not just a few hundred years, but over 12,000 years, to the end of the last great ice age. Imagine you're there. For generations, your ancestors have lived in a world of ice and cold. But now, things are changing. The great glaciers are retreating. The world is warming up. New lands are opening up, forests are spreading, and animals are thriving. For humanity, this must have felt like a great dawn. A promise of a new, warmer, and more abundant world. And then, in the geological blink of an eye, the power went out. This event is known to scientists as the Younger Dryas. And it's one of the most terrifying and mysterious climate events in recent history. Just as the world was shaking off the ice, something slammed on the brakes. Temperatures plummeted, dropping by as much as 10 degrees Celsius in just a few decades. It was as if a new, vicious, 1,000-year winter suddenly fell upon the world. The glaciers stopped retreating. In many places, they began to grow again. The promise of spring was snatched away, replaced by an impossibly harsh cold. Imagine the sheer shock of that. For the early humans who were just beginning to build the first settled communities, it would have been an apocalypse. The plants they were learning to cultivate would have failed. The animal herds they followed would have vanished or migrated. All the knowledge they had gathered about the seasons, about this new, warmer world, suddenly became useless. They were thrown back into a fight for pure survival. It was a reset. A brutal, freezing reset that lasted for over 1,000 years. We see the evidence of this in the ice cores drilled from Greenland and Antarctica. They are like a perfect library of the Earth's climate, and they show this sudden, dramatic plunge in temperature with chilling clarity. The cause is still debated. Perhaps a comet fragment hit the ice sheet over North America, or maybe a shift in ocean currents shut down the planet's heating system. But the how is almost less important than the what. And what happened was that the planet proved it can, and does, change the rules with almost no warning at all. The Earth reminded us that the climate we enjoy is not a guarantee. It's a privilege, and it can be revoked. This wasn't just a random fluke either. When we zoom out and look at the deep history of our planet, we start to see what looks like a pattern, a rhythm. Some researchers have pointed to a recurring cycle of catastrophe that seems to line up with these major shifts, a pulse that beats roughly every 12 years. It's a controversial idea for sure, but it's a fascinating one. It suggests that events like the Younger Dryas might be part of a much larger, predictable clockwork. Think about it. The Younger Dryas period began around 900 years ago. It ended, just as abruptly, around 700 years ago, which is the official beginning of our current geological epoch, the Holocene. The very age we live in was born from a sudden, dramatic climate shift. It's as if a great bell chimed, signaling the end of one world and the beginning of the next. Could it be that civilizations rise in the warm, stable periods and are then pruned back or wiped out entirely when the cycle turns? It gives you a different perspective on history. We're taught to think of human progress as a straight line, always moving upward. But what if it's more like a spiral, always circling back to a certain point dictated by the planet's own cycles? What if we aren't the masters of our destiny, but simply passengers on a world that has its own seasons of creation and destruction? It's a humbling thought. The Earth writes its own timetable, and we just live by it. But the planet's reset button doesn't only control the thermostat. Sometimes, the reset comes not from the cold of ice, but from the heat of fire deep within the Earth. We've all seen volcanoes erupt on the news. They're powerful, destructive, and awe-inspiring. But we're talking about something on a completely different scale. We're talking about supervolcanoes. These aren't just mountains that blow their tops. They are continent-sized time bombs. And about 74 years ago, one of them went off. It's called the Toba supereruption in what is now Indonesia. It's one of the largest explosive eruptions we know of in the last 25 million years. The sheer scale of it is almost impossible to comprehend. It didn't just create a crater, it created a caldera that is now the largest volcanic lake in the world. It blasted so much ash and sulfur into the atmosphere that it likely created a volcanic winter that lasted for years, maybe even a decade. Sunlight would have been dimmed across the globe, causing temperatures to plummet and plants to die off on a massive scale. For the small populations of early humans alive at the time, it would have been a world-ending event. And some scientists believe it was very nearly our end. The Toba catastrophe theory suggests that this single eruption created a genetic bottleneck, that the global human population was slashed to just a few thousand individuals, a tiny, struggling group on the brink of extinction. Whether it was that dire or not is still debated, but the core idea is staggering. One geological event, one eruption, could have nearly erased our entire species. We survived, but it was a close call. We were reset. Our numbers were cut down to almost nothing, and we had to start again. It's a stark reminder of how fragile our existence really is. All of our progress, all of our plans for the future, are utterly dependent on the geological stability of the ground beneath our feet. So, we have resets from ice, and we have resets from fire. The planet, it seems, has multiple ways of clearing the board. But there's another reset mechanism, one that doesn't come from the Earth, but from the sky. We know for a fact that the Earth is not alone in its journey through the cosmos. It's part of a solar system filled with asteroids and comets. It's a cosmic shooting gallery, and our planet has been hit before. We all know what happened to the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. A single asteroid, maybe 6 miles wide, struck the Earth and triggered a mass extinction. It was the ultimate biological reset. It ended the age of reptiles, and in doing so, created the opportunity for a new kind of life to flourish, mammals. Us. Our own existence is owed to a cosmic catastrophe. So we know it can happen, and we know it will happen again. It is not a matter of if, but when. While a dinosaur-killing-sized impact is rare, smaller impacts that could still devastate civilization are far more common. An object just a fraction of that size could explode with the force of thousands of nuclear bombs, triggering mega tsunamis, global wildfires, and an impact winter very similar to the volcanic winter from Toba. It would be a reset on a global scale. Coastal cities would be wiped out. Agriculture would collapse. The intricate web of global trade and communication we rely on would be torn apart in an instant. Survivors would be thrown into a dark age, forced to scavenge for survival in a world they no longer recognized. It's the universe's own way of shuffling the deck, a sudden, violent event that can undo millennia of progress in a single afternoon. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That all our art, our science, our empires, could be undone by a random rock from space. These events, sudden freezes, supervolcanoes, asteroid impacts, are the dramatic, headline-grabbing resets. But there's a quieter, slower, and even more powerful cycle at play. The great ice ages themselves. We currently live in what's called an interglacial period, a warm, comfortable pause between vast ages of ice. These pauses are the exception, not the rule. For most of the last 2.5 million years, the Earth has been much, much colder. Vast ice sheets, miles thick, have repeatedly advanced from the poles, covering huge portions of North America, Europe, and Asia. Then, just as slowly, they retreat. This slow, powerful cycle is the ultimate reset. As the glaciers advance, they are like a great sanding block, grinding mountains down to hills, wiping the landscapes clean, and burying whatever lies beneath them under an unimaginable weight of ice. Coastlines change dramatically as sea levels fall, creating land bridges between continents, allowing humans and animals to migrate to new worlds. Then, as the ice retreats, the sea levels rise again, flooding those same lands and creating islands, separating populations for thousands of years. Think about what this means for our question of lost civilizations. If an advanced society had risen during a previous interglacial period, say 125 years ago, what would be left of it today? Its cities, its monuments, its entire world would have been scoured from the face of the Earth by the ice sheets of the last glacial maximum. Any evidence of its existence would be gone, ground into dust and scattered across the continents. The ice ages are nature's way of constantly reformatting the hard drive. They ensure that very little from one cycle can survive into the next. They are the great forgetting. They shuffle the deck so profoundly that each new interglacial period, each new spring for humanity, really does feel like starting from scratch. So, when we look at the Earth not on a human timescale, but on a geological one, the idea of resets doesn't just seem possible. It seems inevitable. The planet we live on is not a static, stable stage. It's a dynamic, and sometimes violent, system. It has natural cycles of freezing and thawing, of fire and pressure, and it is subject to the random chaos of the cosmos. It is just like that computer restarting. It's not a punishment. It's just the system's way of clearing out old files to make room for a new operating system. And each time it happens, humanity is faced with the ultimate test: adapt, survive, and begin again. But if the physical evidence of our past is so easily erased, what could possibly survive such a profound reset? Perhaps the answer isn't in what we build, but in what we remember, in the stories we tell. This brings us to our question for you. If you knew a global reset was coming, and you could only preserve 3 things for the next iteration of humanity to find, what would they be? What knowledge, what tools, or what ideas would be most important for starting over? In our last part, we left off with a question. If you knew a global reset was coming, and you could only preserve 3 things for the next iteration of humanity to find, what would they be? What knowledge, what tools, or what ideas would be most important for starting over? It is a fascinating thought experiment. But what if it isn't just an experiment? What if our ancient ancestors faced that very question? Maybe they understood that physical objects, even great stone monuments, can be buried and lost. That technology can be forgotten. But they also knew that one thing is incredibly resilient. One thing can be passed through the generations, across the millennia, even through the darkest of ages. And that one thing is a good story. What if the oldest myths from around the world aren't just fantasies? What if they are the messages our ancestors tried to say for us? Echoes in stone and whispers on the wind. Stories that remember what official history has long forgotten. Think about the Great Flood. Almost every single culture on Earth has a story about a world-destroying deluge. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a man who builds a great boat to survive a flood sent by angry gods. In the Bible, Noah is commanded to build an ark to save his family and the world's animals. The ancient Greeks told the story of Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha, who survived a flood in a wooden chest and repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which became people. But it doesn't stop there. Hindu traditions tell of Manu, who was warned of a great flood by a fish and built a ship to save himself. The Hopi people of North America, the Aboriginal tribes of Australia, the peoples of South America, Scandinavia, and China. All of them have a core story about humanity being almost completely wiped out by water, saved only by a few chosen survivors on a boat or a high mountaintop. Now, pause for a moment and really consider how strange that is. These cultures were separated by vast oceans and thousands of years. They had no contact with one another. And yet, they all tell the same fundamental story. It's like a group of people who have never met all waking up from the exact same dream. Mainstream historians often suggest these are just local flood events, magnified by time and retelling. But could it be something more? Could this be a shared, global memory? In our last section, we talked about the Younger Dryas period, the end of the last ice age, when the world's massive glaciers melted. The sea levels rose by nearly 400 feet. Can you imagine what that would have looked like to the people living on the coasts? For them, it would have been the end of the world. It would have been a great flood. So, perhaps these stories aren't just local fables. Perhaps they are the fragmented, time-worn accounts of a genuine worldwide catastrophe. They are like family stories, passed down for so many generations that the details have changed, the names of the gods, the type of the boat, but the core truth of the event survives. It's a memory, so traumatic and so profound that it imprinted itself onto the human psyche itself. And it's not just floods. Our myths seem to remember other kinds of resets too. There's another story you probably know. The story of the Tower of Babel. In it, all of humanity is united. They speak a single language, and they work together to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. They have a unified knowledge, a shared purpose. But this ambition is seen as a threat, and so their language is confused. They can no longer understand each other, and they are scattered across the face of the earth. On the surface, it's a story about hubris. But what if we look at it through the lens of a civilizational reset? What if it's a cultural memory of a time when a highly advanced, perhaps even global, civilization collapsed? A collapse so complete that their shared knowledge, their science, their language, it all just shattered. The survivors were thrown into a dark age, fragmented into smaller tribes, the great unified knowledge lost to all but a few distorted memories. It's an allegory for the collapse of a unified system. We've seen it happen on smaller scales. When the Roman Empire fell, Europe lost access to sanitation, to certain types of architecture, to a vast network of roads and aqueducts. Knowledge was lost, and it took 1,000 years to recover it. The Tower of Babel feels like a story describing that same process, but on a planetary scale. A memory of a great forgetting, when humanity had to start over, not because of a natural disaster, but because their own complex system simply fell apart. This idea of repeated beginnings and endings wasn't strange to everyone in the ancient world. While our modern Western mindset tends to see time as a straight line, a linear progression from the Stone Age to the Space Age, many other cultures saw it very different. In ancient India, philosophers and mystics conceived of time on a scale that is almost impossible for us to comprehend. They saw time as a great wheel, endlessly turning. They described vast cycles of creation and destruction, called yugas. These cycles span millions, even billions of years. Each cycle contains a golden age of enlightenment, which slowly degrades into ages of conflict and ignorance, until finally the universe is dissolved in a great pralaya, or destruction, only to be created once more. Within this worldview, our current civilization is just one brief moment in an endless cosmic story. The idea of resets isn't a shocking theory. It is the fundamental operating principle of the universe. For these ancient thinkers, the thought that we were the first, or the only, advanced civilization would have seemed incredibly naive. We are just one turn of the wheel, one chapter in a book that is constantly being written, erased, and written again. It is a philosophy that strips away our sense of importance, but it also gives a strange kind of comfort. It suggests that even collapse is not an end, but simply a part of the pattern. A cosmic winter that is always eventually followed by a new spring. And this wasn't just an idea in the East. Across the ocean, in the Americas, similar beliefs were held for thousands of years. The Hopi people, for example, teach of a series of worlds that existed before our current one. The first world was destroyed by fire. The second world was destroyed by ice, when the planet rolled over and everything froze. The third world was destroyed by water, another great flood. We now live, they say, in the fourth world. And they have prophecies that it too will come to an end if we lose our connection to the earth and to spirit. Listen again to those methods of destruction: fire, ice, and water. It sounds eerily similar to the catastrophic possibilities we discussed earlier: supervolcanic eruptions, sudden ice ages, and post-glacial flood. Could these be just coincidences? Or are the Hopi and other Native American traditions the keepers of an impossibly ancient historical record, passed down not in books, but in prophecies and ceremonies? For them, these aren't just stories. They are history. They are a warning. But this raises a critical question. How could these memories possibly survive for so long? We are talking about events that may have happened 10, 12, even 20,000 years ago, long before the invention of writing. The answer lies in one of the most powerful and underrated human technologies: oral tradition. We tend to think of pre-literate societies as primitive, but they had incredibly sophisticated methods for preserving information with stunning accuracy over vast periods of time. Stories weren't just for entertainment, they were living databases. They encoded navigation charts in the lyrics of songs, medical knowledge in the steps of a ritual, and history in the epic tales of gods and heroes. The rhythm, the rhyme, the melody, all of it acted as a mnemonic device, a way of ensuring the information wasn't corrupted from one generation to the next. There's real scientific evidence for this. Geologists working with Aboriginal Australian communities have found that their oral traditions contain clear and accurate descriptions of the coastline, as it was over 10,000 years ago, before the sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age. Stories passed down for 500 generations that accurately describe a world their ancestors saw, but which has long since vanished beneath the waves. It's a breathtaking thought. It means that humanity has a library, but most of the books aren't written on paper. They're written in song, in dance, and in the collective memory of people all over the world. These myths of floods and previous worlds might be the oldest books in that library. They are the survival guides, the warning messages, left for us by the people who lived through the last reset. It is like a message in a bottle, but the bottle is a story, and the ocean is time itself. So when we look at the world's collection of myths, we aren't just looking at fantasy. We are looking at a deeply human process of making sense of the past. We are looking at the echoes of real events, real traumas, and real collapses, all filtered through thousands of years of retelling. The flood myths, the story of Babel, the Hindu yugas, the Hopi worlds, they all point in the same direction. They suggest that our ancestors knew something we've forgotten. They knew that civilizations aren't permanent. They knew that progress isn't a straight line. They knew that we have been here before. History, it seems, isn't just what's written down by the victors. It's also what's whispered by the survivors. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What ancient story from your own culture, or one that you've heard, do you think might be describing a real, long-forgotten historical event? It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What ancient story from your own culture, or one that you've heard, do you think might be describing a real, long-forgotten historical event? It's a powerful question to sit with. Because what happens when those stories, those echoes in our myths, seem to find a physical counterpart? What happens when we dig something out of the earth that feels like it belongs more to a story than to our accepted version of history? That's where our journey takes us next. We are moving from the echoes in our myths to the echoes we find in stone and metal. We're looking at the archaeological anomalies, the pieces of evidence that just do not seem to fit. These are the things that make archaeologists scratch their heads and occasionally whisper, "That's impossible." The discovery wouldn't necessarily mean the castle is a fake, but it would absolutely force you to question your assumptions about when cars were invented. It introduces a glitch in the timeline, a question mark where you thought there was a period. And as it turns out, our history is filled with these kinds of glitches. Let's start with something simple. A hammer. In the 1930s, in the town of London, Texas, a family was out for a walk when they found a strange piece of rock with a piece of wood sticking out of it. They took it home, and years later, their son cracked it open. Inside was something astonishing, an iron hammerhead of a surprisingly modern design, encased in what geologists call a concretion, rock that formed around the object. Now, here's the part that doesn't fit. The layer of rock that this concretion came from is estimated by many to be from the Ordovician period. We are talking about more than 400 million years ago. To put that into perspective, that's long before the dinosaurs. It is a time when life was just beginning to crawl out of the oceans. It is, according to everything we know, a time when there should have been no humans, let alone anyone capable of forging a hammer. So what do you do with an object like that? A hammer, a simple, familiar tool, found in a context that is impossibly old. Mainstream science has explanations, of course. Perhaps the concretion formed much more recently around the 19th century miner's tool. It is a process that can happen surprisingly fast under the right chemical conditions. But even if that's the case, the object itself serves a purpose for us here. It represents that jolt, that moment of cognitive dissonance when two timelines seem to crash into each other. You have an object that says humanity, and rock that says hundreds of millions of years ago. For a moment, they exist in the same space, and it forces us to question which one is wrong. It's that feeling, that momentary glitch in the official story, that we are exploring. The world is full of these little paradoxes, these hammers in the stone that hint at a story far stranger than the one we tell ourselves. And it's not just small objects. Sometimes, the anomaly is the size of a city. This brings us to the breathtaking and deeply puzzling world of megalithic structures. These are buildings and sites made from enormous stones. We've all seen pictures of Stonehenge, and it is amazing. But there are other sites around the world that take this concept to a level that is, frankly, baffling. Let's go to the Andes Mountains, to a site in Bolivia called Pumapunku. Here, you'll find enormous blocks of diorite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, scattered across a high-altitude plateau. But these aren't just big, rough blocks. They are cut with what can only be described as machine-like precision. They have perfectly flat faces, 90-degree interior angles, and complex interlocking shapes that fit together like a giant high-tech puzzle. Some blocks have rows of tiny, evenly spaced holes drilled into them, as if by a power tool. The official timeline tells us this was built by the Tiwanaku culture, somewhere around 500 AD, using simple bronze and stone tools. But when you stand there, looking at these creations, that explanation feels incomplete. Engineers and stonemasons today look at Pumapunku and admit that recreating it, even with our modern lasers and diamond-tipped saws, would be an incredibly difficult and expensive project. So, how did they do it? How did an ancient culture, supposedly without the wheel for transport, move 100-ton blocks, and then shape them with a precision our best craftsmen would struggle to match? It's like finding a smartphone in your grandmother's attic from the 1920s. It just doesn't fit the timeline of technological development we've all been taught. And this isn't an isolated case. You see a similar story at the Serapeum in Egypt, where 25 massive granite boxes, each weighing up to 100 tons with their lids, are carved with near-perfect flatness and sit in underground tunnels. Or at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where stones the size of small houses are fitted together so perfectly, without mortar, that you cannot slide a razor blade between them. What we're seeing here is a pattern. It is a legacy of construction that seems far too advanced for its time. These sites challenge our entire understanding of ancient capabilities. They hint at a lost science, a forgotten technology, or a level of skill that has simply vanished from the historical record. We are left with the undeniable results, but the how remains one of history's greatest mysteries. We see the effect, but the cause is missing. These large-scale anomalies are often accompanied by smaller, but no less perplexing, objects. This is the world of out-of-place artifacts, or OPARTs for short. This is the term for the dozens, even hundreds, of peculiar objects that have been found in archaeological contexts where they simply shouldn't exist. They are the proverbial car parts in the medieval castle. Each one, on its own, can perhaps be explained away as a hoax, a misinterpretation, or a one-of-a-kind anomaly. But when you look at them together, they begin to paint a very curious picture. You have things like the so-called Baghdad battery, a set of terracotta pots from ancient Mesopotamia containing iron rods and copper cylinders, which look remarkably like simple galvanic cells. If you fill them with an acidic liquid like grape juice, they produce a small electrical charge. Were the ancients experimenting with electricity 2,000 years before Galvani? Or consider the countless stories of strange metallic spheres, some with parallel grooves etched around their centers, found by miners in Precambrian mineral deposits in South Africa, rock that is said to be 2.8 billion years old. The list goes on and on. Strange coins found in places they couldn't have traveled to, intricate metal objects found in lumps of coal, maps that seem to show coastlines as they looked during the last ice age. The point isn't to say that every single one of these is definitive proof of a lost civilization. Many have been debunked, or have plausible conventional explanations. But the sheer volume of them is what's fascinating. It suggests a persistent nagging problem in our historical timeline. It's like finding a single typo in a book. It's probably just a mistake. But if you find typos on every single page, you start to wonder if the entire book was translated from a different language that you do not understand. These O-parts are the typos in the textbook of history, and they hint that we might be missing a crucial chapter. And then, every once in a while, something is discovered that is so undeniable, so complex, and so utterly out of its time that it completely rewrites the rules. For that, we have to look at one of the most incredible discoveries ever pulled from the sea, the Antikythera mechanism. In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers took shelter from a storm near the island of Antikythera. When the storm passed, they dived and stumbled upon an ancient Roman shipwreck. Amongst the statues and pottery, they recovered a lump of corroded bronze, which sat in a museum for months, mistaken for just another piece of rock. But then, it cracked open, revealing something that should not have existed. Inside was a system of stunningly complex, interlocking gears. It took decades of study and modern X-ray and scanning technology to fully understand what it was. The Antikythera mechanism was an ancient Greek analog computer. Let me say that again. An ancient Greek computer. This wasn't a simple device. It was an intricate astronomical calculator with at least 30 precision-cut bronze gears. By turning a hand crank, a user could predict the position of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets that were known at the time. It could predict eclipses, track the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games, and it even accounted for the subtle variations in the moon's orbit. The level of mechanical engineering and theoretical astronomy required to build this is staggering. To put this in context, nothing even approaching this level of complexity appears in the historical record again for over 1,000 years, until the great astronomical clocks of medieval Europe in the 14th century. It's as if a Wright Flyer from 1903 was found to have a jet engine inside. The Antikythera mechanism shatters our comfortable, linear view of progress. It tells us that at least one group of ancient people possessed a level of technological sophistication that was then completely lost. It vanished from history. We have to ask, was this a singular stroke of genius, a one-off invention that was never replicated? Or is it possible that this mechanism is the last surviving example of a whole branch of ancient technology that has otherwise been erased from memory? It's a chilling thought. If something this advanced could be created, and then the knowledge to create it could be so completely forgotten, what else have we lost? The Antikythera mechanism isn't just an anomaly, it is a ghost. It's the ghost of a lost world of knowledge, reminding us that the path of progress is not always a straight line. Sometimes it circles back on itself, and sometimes it falls off a cliff. This idea of a lost global knowledge becomes even more compelling when we look up at the sky and then back down at the earth. All around the world, we find ancient structures that are built with an inexplicable precision in their astronomical alignments. This isn't just about 1 or 2 sites pointing north. This is a global phenomenon, woven into the very fabric of ancient architecture across cultures that supposedly never interacted. In Ireland, the 5,000-year-old passage tomb of Newgrange is built so that on the winter solstice, and only on the winter solstice, a single beam of sunlight penetrates a small opening and illuminates the chamber deep inside. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an accuracy that modern builders would find difficult to replicate. Its internal shafts were once thought to be for ventilation, but we now know they pointed directly at specific stars, like those in Orion's belt, that were significant in Egyptian cosmology. Across the ocean in Mexico, the Pyramid of Chichen Itza is a massive stone calendar. During the spring and fall equinoxes, the setting sun casts a shadow that creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down its main staircase. Why? Why would so many different, disconnected peoples all over the world pour so much effort and resource into aligning their most sacred structures with the heavens? It took generations to build these sites. It required an incredibly sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, passed down over long periods of time. This global pattern suggests something more than coincidence. It suggests a shared obsession, a common body of knowledge that was seen as fundamentally important to survival, or spirituality, or both. It's as if there was a forgotten global culture, whose primary language was the language of the stars. They wrote their knowledge not in books that could burn, but in stone that could endure. They created these massive, silent clocks and calendars that would continue to mark the passage of the sun and stars long after the builders themselves were gone. Perhaps they were leaving a message. Perhaps they were trying to pass on a warning about long-term cycles, the very cycles that they encoded in their architecture. They were reminding us to watch the sky. So when we step back and look at this part of the puzzle, the picture becomes clearer and also more mysterious. We have out-of-place artifacts, like the London hammer, that challenge our geological timeline. We have impossibly precise megalithic structures like Pumapunku that challenge our understanding of ancient technology. We have the ghost of a lost science in the gears of the Antikythera mechanism. And we have a global signature of advanced astronomical knowledge written in stone. These aren't just stories or myths anymore. These are things you can see and touch. They are physical, tangible paradoxes. They are the evidence that doesn't fit, the puzzle pieces left over after the picture is supposedly complete. They force us to consider that maybe, just maybe, the past wasn't as simple as we think. That maybe there were other stories, other cycles of rise and fall, that have been almost entirely forgotten. It's that feeling of finding car parts in a medieval castle. It doesn't mean the whole history of the castle is wrong, but it forces you to ask, what part of the story are we missing? It makes you think about our own time, doesn't it? Our own technology is so complex, but also so fragile in many ways. So I will ask you, what modern technology do you think would most surprise archaeologists if they found it in ancient ruins? It is a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? Imagining a team of future archaeologists centuries from now, carefully brushing the dirt away from a fossilized smartphone. They'd hold it in their hands, this impossible object, and their entire understanding of our timeline would shatter. But what if the most compelling, the most profound evidence for a reset isn't an object you can hold? What if the clues aren't buried in layers of rock, but are embedded in the very story of our own development? What if the biggest anomaly is us? We've looked at artifacts and structures that seem to defy their place in history. Now, we turn our gaze inward to the anthropological puzzle of humanity itself. Because when you look at our journey, it isn't a smooth, steady climb. It's a story of strange, sudden leaps forward, of explosive changes that are difficult to explain. It is as if our own minds, our very potential, were activated in bursts. For an almost unimaginable stretch of time, our ancestors were physically just like us. Their skeletons, their brains, were anatomically modern. For over 100,000 years, they walked the earth. Yet, during that immense period, their way of life was remarkably static. The stone tools they made in Africa were almost identical to the ones they made in Europe, and they barely changed for tens upon tens of thousands of years. They were surviving, yes, but not in the way we think of ourselves as human. There was no art, no elaborate burials, no clear signs of symbolic thought or complex culture. And then, somewhere around 50,000 years ago, a switch was flipped. Archaeologists call it the Great Leap Forward, or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. In what is a mere blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, everything changed. Suddenly, all across the globe, we see the first unambiguous signs of the modern human mind at work. We see breathtaking cave paintings, like the ones in Chauvet or Lascaux. We see meticulously crafted jewelry, musical instruments like bone flutes, and intricate carvings in ivory and stone. We find gravesites where the dead are buried with care, adorned with beads and tools, suggesting a belief in an afterlife. It's like having a supercomputer with the latest hardware sitting on your desk for 100,000 years, doing nothing but running a simple calculator program. Then, seemingly overnight, someone installs the entire internet, advanced creative software, and a complex operating system. The hardware didn't change, but something fundamental activated it. The potential was always there, but it was dormant. What was that spark? What was that sudden software update that transformed our species from a simple tool user into a creator of worlds? Mainstream science often points to a possible genetic mutation affecting the brain, or the development of complex language. And that may well be part of the story. But the sheer speed and scope of the transformation is what's so staggering. It wasn't a slow, gradual crawl towards complexity. It was an explosion of creativity and abstract thought that appeared almost simultaneously in different parts of the world. So we have this vast period of time where our ancestors are physically used, but they aren't behaving in the complex, symbolic ways we do. Then, in a geological instant, they are. They are painting, they are creating, they are imagining. This wasn't evolution as a slow, steady ramp. This was a light turning on. If we're considering the idea of a reset, one has to wonder, was this a leap forward, or was it humanity finally recovering a piece of what it had lost? This pattern of sudden, widespread change doesn't stop there. Let's move forward in time, past the age of cave art and wandering hunters, to the period just after the last great ice age melted away, around 12,000 years ago. For 99% of our time on Earth, humans had lived as hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, taking what nature provided. It was a successful strategy that lasted for millennia. Then, something unprecedented happened. In at least 7, and perhaps more, completely separate locations around the globe, people who had absolutely no contact with one another, all began to do the exact same thing. In the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, they started cultivating wheat and barley. In China, they domesticated rice and millet. In the highlands of New Guinea, it was taro and bananas. In Mexico, they focused on maize and beans. In the Andes of South America, it was potatoes and quinoa. All around the world, humanity independently decided to stop wandering and start farming. This is the central analogy we spoke of earlier. It's like students in separate classrooms, in separate schools, on separate continents. They cannot see each other's work, they cannot communicate, yet they all spontaneously solve the same, incredibly complex math problem at the exact same moment in history. The odds of that happening by pure chance are astronomically small. And think about what a strange choice this was. Early farming was incredibly hard work. It meant a less varied diet, a greater risk of starvation if a crop failed, and living in close quarters with animals and other people, which led to a rise in diseases. Why would so many different cultures all abandon a nomadic lifestyle that had served them perfectly well for countless generations, all to adopt a more difficult and dangerous way of life, and all within the same few thousand-year window? The conventional answer is that the warming climate after the Ice Age made it possible. But that only explains the how, not the why. Why did the idea itself occur to everyone, everywhere, all at once. Unless, of course, it wasn't a brand new idea. What if it was a remembered idea? What if agriculture was a foundational piece of knowledge from a previous cycle, a skill set that was lost during the chaos of the last cataclysm? Perhaps the survivors carried the memory, the story of farming, and as soon as the Earth's climate stabilized enough to make it viable again, they put that ancient knowledge back into practice. It wasn't an invention, it was a recovery. Just pause and consider that for a moment. Humanity, scattered across the globe by oceans and mountains and deserts, comes to the same world-changing conclusion at roughly the same time. It is a coincidence so profound, so unlikely, it almost forces you to ask if it is really a coincidence at all. And once we had agriculture, the next leap happened even faster. The moment we settled down, the pace of change accelerated beyond anything seen before. This new way of life led directly to food surpluses, which led to permanent settlements. Those settlements grew into villages, then towns, and then the world's first great cities. And with cities came the need for laws, for writing, for mathematics, for organized government. Humanity went from small, nomadic bands to sprawling complex empires in what was, historically speaking, a heartbeat. But as these new civilizations pop up all over the world, another strange pattern begins to emerge. We start seeing the same symbols, the same stories, and the same architectural concepts appearing in cultures that, according to our mainstream historical timeline, should have never, ever met. The most obvious example, of course, is the pyramid. We see them in Egypt, but we also see them thousands of miles away and thousands of years later in Mexico and Peru, built by people who supposedly had no knowledge of ancient Egypt. We find them in China, in Cambodia, and elsewhere. The engineering challenges are immense, yet the fundamental idea, a massive, triangular structure reaching for the heavens, appears again and again. We see strange symbols that repeat across cultures. The swastika, now tragically corrupted, was for millennia an ancient symbol of good fortune and the sun, found everywhere from India to Native American cultures. We find carvings of a mysterious handbag or basket held by gods or important figures at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, which is over 11,000 years old, and we see the exact same motif in the hands of the Olmec and Maya peoples in Central America thousands of years later. And we see the same stories. As we touched on earlier, nearly every culture on Earth has a memory of a great, world-destroying flood, a story told by people in the deserts of the Middle East and the rainforests of South America alike. How does this happen? Is it simply that the human brain, when faced with similar problems, naturally arrives at the same solutions and the same symbols? That's certainly possible. Or are we seeing the scattered echoes of a single, much older global parent culture? A mother civilization from before the last reset, whose ideas and symbols were carried by the survivors like precious seeds scattered on the wind. After the cataclysm, as new civilizations began to sprout, those ancient seeds of knowledge grew again, producing similar-looking flowers in fields all over the world. It's a tantalizing thought, isn't it? That these common threads aren't just coincidences, but are fragmented memories of a time before the Great Forgetting. So, it is not just a sudden leap in our behavior with the invention of art and agriculture. It is also this shared library of ideas and symbols that seems to have been distributed globally. It all points to the possibility of a common source, a deep memory from a time long, long past. But perhaps the biggest leap of all, the one that underpins everything we've just discussed, is the most mysterious and the most profound: the emergence of complex language and self-aware consciousness. We simply do not know how this happened. There is no fossil record for an idea. Language, with its intricate rules of grammar and syntax, is not something that would just pop into existence. It is the most complex technology we have ever created. And our own consciousness, our ability to not just think, but to think about thinking, to be aware of our own existence, to ponder our place in the universe, is the ultimate mystery. This is the true software update we mentioned earlier, the one that sparked the great leap forward. It is the ability to tell stories, to plan for a future you cannot yet see, to share complex ideas, and to build a collective understanding of reality. If we look at this through the lens of a reset, it presents a fascinating possibility. What if this incredible tool, our own conscious mind and the language it uses, wasn't developed from scratch in our current cycle? What if it was the primary inheritance from a previous one? Imagine a global catastrophe that wipes away all cities, all technology, all books. What is the one thing the survivors would still possess? They would carry it inside their own minds. The knowledge, the stories, and most importantly, the language to pass it on. It is the ultimate survival kit, the one thing that ensures humanity can always find a way to reboot after a crash. So the anthropological puzzle isn't about a single out-of-place hammer or one mysterious ancient computer. It is about the very pattern of our existence. It is about these sudden bursts of genius, these simultaneous global inventions, these shared myths that echo through millennia. The story of human development doesn't seem to follow a straight, unbroken line. It's more like a series of sudden downloads of information, of memories re-emerging, pushing us forward in great, inexplicable leaps. It really makes you think about our own time and the incredible pace of change we are living through. And that leads me to a question for you. What human achievement, from any point in our history, do you think happened too quickly to be just a normal, natural development? It is a wonderful question to reflect on. We look back through history and see these brilliant flashes of genius, the birth of agriculture, the invention of writing, the dawn of philosophy, achievements that fundamentally reshaped the human world. But here's the other, more sobering side of that puzzle. For all the incredible effort and inspiration that goes into building a civilization, they seem to be surprisingly temporary. It's as if every culture, every empire, is born with an invisible expiration date stamped upon it. The very same leaps in development that allow a society to flourish also seem to sow the seeds of its eventual decline. The story of our known history isn't one of endless, upward progress. Instead, it follows a rhythm. Pulse. A pattern that is as predictable as it is profound. It is the great cycle of rise and fall. If you step back and look at history from a distance, you start to see that civilizations often behave like living organisms. They have a distinct life cycle. They are born, they grow, they mature, and eventually, they die. It begins with a birth, a metaphorical spring. This is often a time of great struggle and hardship, perhaps emerging from the ashes of a previous collapse. People are united by a common purpose and a shared set of values. They are pioneers, tough and innovative, building something new out of the rubble of the old. Then comes summer, the period of vigorous growth. The civilization expands its borders, its influence, its wealth. This is often a golden age, a time when it produces its greatest art, its most profound philosophy, and its most brilliant scientific discoveries. Confidence is high, and the future seems limitless. Next is autumn, the peak of its power and complexity. The civilization is at its most magnificent, a vast and intricate machine. But with this maturity comes new problems. Complacency sets in. Political infighting becomes common. The gap between the rich and the poor widens. The very systems that made it strong now become rigid and brittle, unable to adapt to new challenges. And finally comes winter, the period of decline and collapse. Weakened from within and facing pressures from without, the civilization begins to crumble. It can be a slow, grinding decay or a sudden catastrophic fall. The great cities empty, the intricate trade networks break down, and the society dissolves, leaving behind only ruins and memories. This is the dark age when the light of that civilization is extinguished. It is just like the seasons of the year. You have the vibrant new growth of spring, the full bloom of summer, the rich harvest of autumn, and the quiet decay of winter. And just as winter isn't a final end, but a necessary period of rest before the next spring, the collapse of one civilization often creates the fertile ground for the next one to grow. It's a constant, pulsing rhythm that we see again and again throughout recorded history. Why should this be? Why do not successful civilizations just keep succeeding? Why does every mountain of achievement seem to eventually crumble into a valley of forgetfulness? This isn't an anomaly. For all of known history, it appears to be the rule. And what's even more curious is that historians have noticed a strange regularity in these cycles, especially when it comes to great empires. A number of thinkers, most famously the historian Sir John Glubb, studied the lifespans of over a dozen empires, from the ancient Assyrians to the Persians, the Romans, the Ottomans, and the British. And he found a startling consistency. He discovered that many of these great empires lasted for about 10 generations. That's roughly 250 years. Again and again, this number appears. A nation or empire would burst onto the world stage, conquer vast territories, enjoy a long period of prosperity and power, and then begin its decline and eventual collapse, all within that 250-year time frame. The theory behind it is deeply human. The first generation, the pioneers, are forged in hardship. They are bold, energetic, and willing to sacrifice for the future. Their children, born into a rising power, still carry some of that fire. But by the time you get several generations down the line, things have changed. People have inherited wealth and privilege they didn't have to work for. They become preoccupied with internal quarrels and intellectual debates. They grow comfortable, perhaps even decadent, and lose the very virtues that made their ancestors great. The original spirit that built the empire has faded. It's a sobering thought. Is it possible that we, as human beings, can only maintain that initial, creative, unifying spark for so long before comfort and complexity led us down a path of division and decay? Is there a natural lifespan to the collective will of a people? To make this feel less abstract, let's look at the most famous example of this cycle in the Western world, the fall of the Roman Empire. At its peak, Rome was a wonder of the world. It was a civilization of unprecedented scale and sophistication. They were masters of engineering, building roads and aqueducts with such precision that some are still in use today. They developed a complex legal system that forms the basis for many modern laws. They even invented a form of concrete that was in many ways superior to our own, capable of setting underwater and lasting for millennia. They had created a world of interconnectedness, stability, and technological marvels that wouldn't be seen again for 1,000 years. But it didn't last. The fall of Rome wasn't a single event. It was a slow, agonizing process of decay that lasted for centuries. The empire became too large to govern effectively. Political corruption became rampant. The economy faltered under the weight of endless wars and heavy taxation. And eventually, the borders could no longer be defended from waves of migrating peoples. One by one, the complex systems that held the empire together began to fail. But when Rome fell, it wasn't just a political entity that vanished. It was a library of human knowledge being burned to the ground. In the centuries that followed, the formula for making their incredible concrete was completely lost. The engineering principles behind the aqueducts and the great colosseums were forgotten. Advanced medical texts were no longer copied or studied. Europe entered a period we call the Dark Ages, a time where humanity had to slowly and painstakingly rediscover skills and knowledge that the Romans had once taken for granted. It is like if our global internet were to crash tomorrow, and we didn't just lose all the information stored on it, but we also collectively forgot how to build the servers, write the code, and lay the fiber optic cables to ever get it back online. The knowledge wouldn't just be out of reach, the very blueprint for recreating it would be gone. The story of Rome is the ultimate historical lesson that progress is not a one-way street. Knowledge is fragile. A civilization can reach incredible heights of achievement and then fall so far that it forgets how it got there in the first place. But collapses aren't always loud, violent affairs like the fall of Rome. Sometimes they are quiet, gradual, and far more mysterious. For another example, we can travel across the ocean and deep into the jungles of Central America to the world of the ancient Maya. The classic Maya civilization, from about 250 to 900 AD, was brilliant. They were master astronomers who tracked the movements of the stars and planets with breathtaking accuracy. They were gifted mathematicians who independently developed the concept of the number zero. And they were incredible architects, building magnificent stone cities like Tikal, Copan, and Calakmul, with towering pyramids that rose above the jungle canopy. And then, at the absolute height of their power and population, they just left. Around the year 900 AD, in a period called the Terminal Classic Collapse, they began to abandon their great southern cities. There's no widespread evidence of a foreign invasion or a single devastating war. Instead, over the course of a few generations, they simply stopped building their grand monuments, packed up what they could, and walked away, letting the jungle reclaim their proudest achievements. For centuries, the reason was one of history's greatest enigmas. Today, researchers believe it was likely a perfect storm of factors. A series of prolonged, severe droughts, identified in climate records, likely led to crop failures and famine. This may have been worsened by deforestation caused by the Maya themselves. This environmental crisis was likely combined with endemic warfare between the city-states, a breakdown of their complex trade routes, and a loss of faith in their ruling class. The system had simply become too large, too complex, and too brittle, and when the pressures mounted, it shattered. The Maya are a haunting example of a civilization that reached an extraordinary peak of intellectual and artistic achievement, and then just faded away. Their silent, empty cities, swallowed by vines and trees, show us that a society's collapse can be a quiet one, a slow unwinding driven by a changing environment and a system that has become too complex to sustain itself. So whether we look at the slow, violent decay of Rome or the silent, mysterious abandonment of the Maya cities, the historical pattern is there. Civilizations seem to follow a natural rhythm. They are born, they flourish, and they die. And with each death, precious knowledge is lost, left to lie dormant, waiting to be rediscovered by some future generation. History, it seems, is not a straight line of ever-increasing progress. It is a grand cycle of building and collapsing, of remembering and forgetting. It truly is like the seasons of the year. What goes up must eventually come down. But perhaps we can take a small amount of comfort in that pattern, because we know that spring always, in the end, follows winter. And it begs us to look at our own world. Looking at the events around us today, our challenges, our culture, our technology, it makes you wonder. So I'll ask you, do you think we are in the spring, summer, autumn, or winter of our current civilization? Looking at the events around us today, our challenges, our culture, our technology, it makes you wonder. So I'll ask you, do you think we are in the spring, summer, autumn, or winter of our current civilization? It's a powerful question. And whatever your answer is, it brings up another one. If we are in an autumn or a winter, what happens next? Is it just the end? The evidence from our deep past seems to suggest something else entirely. It suggests that the end of one season isn't the end of the story. It's just the start of a new one, Because if there's one defining characteristic of humanity, one skill we've mastered above all others, it's the ability to bounce back from the very brink. This is the story of our survival solutions. It is the story of how, time and time again, when the lights go out, we find a way to light a new fire. To really understand this, we have to go back. Way back. To a time when our species faced not just the collapse of a civilization, but near total extinction. Geneticists have discovered something fascinating and terrifying in our own DNA. They call it a population bottleneck. Imagine a bottle full of diverse, colorful beads representing all of early humanity. Now, turn that bottle upside down. Only a few beads manage to trickle out. Those few beads are the ancestors of everyone alive today. Around 75 years ago, a supervolcano in Indonesia, called Toba, erupted with a force that's almost impossible for us to comprehend. It plunged the planet into a volcanic winter that may have lasted for years, blocking out the sun, killing off plants, and devastating ecosystems. The evidence suggests that the global human population crashed. Some studies estimate it was reduced to just a few thousand individuals. Maybe even less. Just take a moment to really let that sink in. The entire future of humanity, every city, every song, every book, every person you've ever known, all of it depended on a group of people so small they could fit in a modern concert hall. They were scattered, isolated, and living in a world that had suddenly become hostile and alien. This wasn't just a reset. This was nearly a complete shutdown. And yet, here we are. We made it through the eye of that needle. The very fact that you and I are here today is a testament to the sheer, stubborn resilience of those few thousand ancestors. They weren't just lucky. They were intelligent. They were adaptable. And they knew how to work together. That near-extinction event, as terrible as it was, may have forged the very qualities that allowed us to eventually inherit the Earth. It proves that even when our numbers dwindle to almost nothing, the spark of humanity finds a way to endure. We've been to the edge of annihilation before, and we found a way back. So what happens after an event like that? The survivors, scattered and separated, are forced into new environments. They have to solve impossible problems with nothing but their wits and whatever they can find around them. This is where we see one of humanity's greatest superpowers emerge: the ability to develop incredible, specialized technologies for survival. And when I say technology, I do not just mean microchips and engines. I mean deep, ingenious knowledge of the natural world. Think of the Inuit peoples of the Arctic. In one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth, they developed a suite of technologies that are, frankly, genius. The kayak, for silent hunting in icy waters. The snow goggle, with a thin slit to prevent snow blindness. The igloo, a dome that uses the physics of heat to create a warm, stable shelter from nothing but frozen water. This is technology of the highest order. Or, consider the San people of the Kalahari Desert. For tens of thousands of years, they've thrived in a place with little visible water and extreme temperatures. Their technology is an encyclopedic knowledge of plants, which ones hold water, which are medicinal, which are poisonous. They developed tracking skills so advanced, they can read a story in the sand that's invisible to most of us. This pattern appears all over the world. From the Polynesians who learned to read the ocean swells and the stars to navigate thousands of miles of open ocean, to the tribes of the Amazon who learned to use plant toxins for medicine and hunting. When our global network breaks down, we do not just disappear. We become hyperlocal experts. We create smaller, incredibly robust pockets of civilization, each one a master of its own unique world. It is like our global civilization is a giant, complex supercomputer. A reset event is a massive power surge that crashes the whole system. But humanity had the foresight to save its most important files onto thousands of tiny, independent, rugged hard drives. Each one of those drives, those isolated cultures, held a unique piece of survival code. And they kept that code safe until the system could be rebooted. This leads to another fascinating pattern we see throughout history. What follows a crisis? What happens after the flood, after the fire, after the freeze? You might expect a long, slow, painful recovery. And sometimes that's true. But very often, what we actually see is an explosion of innovation. The end of the last ice age is the perfect example. The climate was chaotic. The Younger Dryas period, as we've discussed, was a sudden 1,000-year return to freezing conditions, a massive shock to the system for the humans who were just getting used to a warming world. But what happened immediately after it ended, around 700 years ago? Everything changed. Suddenly, almost like it came out of nowhere, we see the birth of agriculture in multiple, unconnected locations around the world. We see the construction of incredible megalithic sites like Göbekli Tepe, which predates pottery and even writing. We see the beginning of permanent settlements, the foundation of the very first towns and cities. It was an astonishing burst of creativity and social reorganization. It's what historians call the Neolithic Revolution. Why does this happen? Why does crisis so often lead to creation? It is like a forest fire. While it is happening, it is pure destruction. It feels like the end of everything. But the fire clears away the old, dead wood. It returns nutrients to the soil. And in its wake, new life can finally get the sunlight it needs to grow. In the same way, a civilizational collapse, as tragic as it is for the people living through it, can break down old, rigid systems that were holding back new ideas. It forces the survivors to think differently. The old ways clearly didn't work, so you have no choice but to invent new ones. Pressure creates diamonds. Necessity becomes the mother of invention. These aren't just cliches, they are fundamental truths about the human story. We seem to do our most creative thinking when our backs are against the wall. And so, the reset doesn't just send us back to square one. In a strange way, it clears the board so we can invent a whole new game. Each major crisis acts as a painful but powerful engine for progress, pushing us onto the next stage of our development. But this raises a crucial question. If civilizations collapse, if libraries are burned and cities are buried, how does the knowledge get passed on? How do the survivors of one cycle transmit their hard-won wisdom to the next? The answer is both incredibly simple and profoundly beautiful. They tell stories. We tend to think of our knowledge as being stored in books or on servers. We rely on the written word, on physical and digital artifacts. But these things are fragile. Books burned. Hard drives fail. Stone tablets break. For most of human history, our most important information was stored in the most durable and portable medium ever created, the human mind. Oral tradition isn't just about telling fairy tales around a campfire. For our ancestors, it was a living database. Myths, songs, poems, and chants were meticulously crafted memory devices designed to encode and transmit vast amounts of practical information. The epics of ancient Greece contained lessons on morality and strategy. The Polynesian myths contained star maps and navigation instructions hidden within the journeys of their gods. The songlines of the Australian Aboriginals are one of the most stunning examples. A songline is a song that describes a journey. As you sing it, you are literally walking through a mental map of the landscape, and the lyrics tell you where to find water, food, and sacred sites. It is a map, a history book, and a spiritual guide, all woven into a melody that can be passed down for thousands, even tens of thousands of years. Think about the power of that. A story can survive a flood that washes away a city. A song can outlast an empire that turns to dust. When everything else is gone, the stories remain. They are the threads that connect one cycle to the next. They are the messages in a bottle, washed ashore from a world that has been lost, carrying the essential survival guide for building a new one. This is why, perhaps, the central analogy for our resilience is that of a video game. Each time humanity faces a catastrophic game over, it is a reset. But we do not start the next level with our memory wiped clean. We start with the experience we gained from the last playthrough. We start with the knowledge of what worked and what didn't. The stories and myths are the walkthroughs, the strategy guides left behind by the previous players. They remind us of the Great Flood, so we know to respect the water. They tell of the Age of Fire, so we learn to manage it carefully. They speak of heroes who were clever and cooperative and resilient. They are carrying the lessons forward. So when we look back at the grand sweep of human history, the story isn't one of failure. It is not about how many times we've fallen. It is about how many times we've gotten back up. We survived near extinction. We learned to thrive in every environment on the planet. We turned the ashes of our greatest disasters into the fertilizer for our greatest innovations. And through it all, we carried our wisdom in our words and our songs. We are the descendants of the ultimate survivors. It is written not just in our history books, but in our very DNA and in the echoes of the oldest stories we still tell. That resilience is our inheritance. And it makes you wonder about the skills we've held onto and the ones we may have forgotten. Which brings me to a question for you. What skill from the past do you think would be most valuable if our technology suddenly disappeared? And it makes you wonder about the skills we've held onto and the ones we may have forgotten. Which brings me to a question for you. What skill from the past do you think would be most valuable if our technology suddenly disappeared? It's a fascinating thought experiment, isn't it? Thinking about what we've lost, what knowledge has simply evaporated over time. But it leads to an even deeper, more fundamental question. If these resets, these great collapses, have happened before, why do not we remember them? Why isn't there a clear, unambiguous record? Why isn't the story of the last advanced civilization taught in every history class? We've explored the physical evidence that gets wiped away by time, by ice and water and earth. But there's another kind of forgetting that happens, one that takes place not in the soil, but in the soul. It is the psychology of forgetting. And it might be the most powerful force of all in erasing the past. Think about a traumatic event in your own life. A truly difficult, painful experience. When you recall it, you probably do not remember every single detail with perfect clarity. You might remember flashes, feelings, a specific sound or smell. Your mind, in an act of self-preservation, often blurs the edges and buries the most painful parts. It does this to protect you, to allow you to move on and function. Now, imagine that on a global scale. Imagine a trauma that affects every single person on the planet. A catastrophe so immense that it shatters the very foundations of reality. The survivors wouldn't be meticulously documenting the event for future historians. They'd be in shock, consumed by the simple, brutal tasks of staying alive. The memory of what happened would be a wound, a source of immense pain for the entire species. And just like an individual, a collective will instinctively try to protect itself from a memory that's too painful to bear. The story gets buried. Not intentionally, not as part of some conspiracy, but through a deep, collective, psychological need to survive. The memory isn't deleted entirely, but it is pushed down deep into the subconscious of our species, where it lives on not as a clear history, but as an echo, a shadow, a myth. This is how trauma gets buried in our collective memory. It becomes a ghost in our machine. There's a profound need to forget in order to move forward. This is something we all understand on a personal level. Think about a difficult breakup. To heal and be open to a new relationship, you cannot spend every day reliving the arguments, the heartbreak, the final goodbye. Your mind helps you by softening the memories, by allowing the good times to fade into a gentle nostalgia and the bad times to lose their sharp cutting edge. It's not about pretending it never happened, but about not letting the pain of the past paralyze your future. A civilization, or what's left of one after a reset, is no different. To rebuild, you have to have hope. You have to believe that the future can be better. You have to plant seeds, raise children, and build new communities. If every moment of your day was haunted by the crystal clear memory of the world that was lost, the incredible cities, the effortless technology, the knowledge you can no longer access, it would be crushing. It would breed a kind of despair that makes progress impossible. So, humanity forgets. The collective psyche lets go of the specifics of the catastrophe as a survival mechanism. It's a necessary amnesia. The focus has to shift from what was lost to what can be built. You have to forget the intricate details of the palace so you can learn how to build a simple, sturdy hut. This act of forgetting isn't a failure of memory. It is a triumph of resilience. It is the mind's way of clearing the slate so that life can begin again. This brings us to another simple truth about human nature. We are creatures of the present moment. Our brains are wired to focus on what's right in front of us, the immediate threats and the immediate opportunities. It is what has kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine you are a survivor in a post-cataclysmic world. Your daily concerns are not abstract or historical. They are stark and real. Where is the next meal coming from? Is this water safe to drink? What was that sound in the woods? Is that shelter strong enough to withstand the coming storm? In that context, the memory of a previous world with instantaneous communication and flying machines is not just useless, it is a dangerous distraction. Dwelling on a past you cannot reclaim will not help you find food or build a fire. The concerns of the past become an unaffordable luxury when the present demands your absolute, undivided attention. It is like worrying about your long-term investment portfolio while your house is actively on fire. Your priorities have to shift dramatically and immediately to what matters right now. So, the stories of the before times would naturally fade. The generation that lived through it might speak of it in hushed, fragmented whispers. Their children, born into the new, harsher reality, would hear these as strange fairy tales, disconnected from their lived experience of survival. And their grandchildren? To them, it would just be the stuff of legend. The great forgetting happens in part because humanity as a whole becomes too busy surviving the present to afford the luxury of remembering a complicated past. But the memories do not vanish completely. They cannot. A trauma that vast leaves an imprint on the human spirit. So what happens to it? It gets processed. It gets transformed. And one of the most powerful tools our species has ever invented for processing trauma is mythology. Think of the great flood myths found in cultures all over the world, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah, from Hindu Puranas to Native American legends. Cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, all telling a strikingly similar story. The world is washed clean by a devastating flood, and a handful of survivors are chosen to begin humanity anew. Is it possible that these aren't just stories? What if they are the processed memory of a real global event? A cataclysm involving unimaginable amounts of water, perhaps from melting ice caps after a comet impact. Telling that story as a literal historical event would be terrifying and chaotic. It's a memory of pure destruction, a nightmare. But by weaving it into a myth, we give it meaning. The flood becomes a divine punishment for human arrogance. The survivors aren't just lucky, they are chosen for their virtue. The event is no longer a random, meaningless catastrophe. It is a moral lesson. It is a story about a second chance, about renewal. It's a way for the human psyche to take an unbearable fact and turn it into a survivable story. The myth becomes a safe container for a memory that was too radioactive to handle in its raw form. Mythology, then, isn't a collection of lies about the past. Perhaps it is a collection of deep, psychological truths told in the only language that could survive the trauma of a global reset. It's the scar tissue that forms over a collective wound, protecting us from the raw memory while reminding us that something profound once happened here. And this process of transformation is ongoing. The past is never a fixed thing. It is constantly being reinterpreted through the lens of the present. Each new generation takes the stories of the old and reshapes them to fit their own understanding of the world. Think about a story your grandparents told you about their youth. When you retell that story to your own children someday, it will not be exactly the same. You'll emphasize different parts, you might forget certain details, and add a little of your own flair. It's a natural process. Now, imagine this game of telephone playing out not over 2 or 3 generations, but over 200 or 300. The initial survivors of a reset might tell fragmented, horrified accounts of what they witnessed. Their children, hearing these stories, would try to make sense of them, perhaps filling in the gaps with supernatural explanations, because the reality of the before times is simply too alien to comprehend. 1,000 years later, those accounts have become grand, sweeping epics of gods and monsters, of ages of gold and ages of darkness. The kernel of truth, the memory of a lost world, is still in there, but it is buried under layers and layers of reinterpretation. We do this even with our own well-documented history. Our view of the Roman Empire, for example, is colored by centuries of art, literature, and film. We see it through the lens of our own political debates about republics and empires. We cannot help but project our present onto the past. So, if a memory of a previous advanced civilization did survive, it would inevitably be filtered through the worldviews of agricultural societies, then early city-states, then warring empires. The memory of a power source might become a story about a magical stone. The memory of a spacecraft might become a fiery chariot of the gods. Each generation reinterprets the past, not to deceive, but to understand. They use the concepts and the language available to them. And over time, this process of reinterpretation further distances us from the literal, historical truth of a world that came before. So, why do not we remember? We don't remember because we are human. We don't remember because our minds are designed to protect us from paralyzing trauma. We forget because we have to, in order to move forward, to have hope, to build a new world on the ashes of the old. We do not remember because we are so focused on the immediate needs of the present that the distant past becomes an unaffordable luxury. And the memories that do survive aren't preserved in history books, but are transformed into myths and legends, stories that carry the emotional weight of the event, but shed the unbearable, literal fact. The past is constantly being rewritten by the present. This process of forgetting, this collective amnesia, isn't a flaw in our design. It may be the most essential feature of our resilience. It's what allows humanity to fall, and to always get back up again. It raises a fascinating question about our own relationship with the past. Do you think it is better to remember traumatic events, with all the pain they carry, or to let them fade from our collective memory so we can have a fresh start? As we ponder the psychology of how we forget, it naturally leads us to think about the patterns this creates. If civilizations rise and fall, and if we are built to forget these falls, we are destined to repeat the cycle. But many ancient cultures didn't see this as a tragedy. In fact, they built their entire understanding of reality around it. They saw time not as a straight line, but as a great turning wheel. And that brings us to the philosophy of cycles. They saw time not as a straight line, but as a great turning wheel. And that brings us to the philosophy of cycles. If you're like most of us in the modern world, you probably think of time as a road. It starts somewhere in the past, runs through the present moment where we're standing, and stretches out ahead of us into the future. It's a one-way street. We call this linear time. Every second that passes is a step forward on a journey that never repeats. Our history is a story with a beginning, a middle, and, presumably, an end. Every invention, every discovery, is a permanent milestone on this road. But what if that's only half the picture? What if, for most of human history, we saw time in a completely different way? Not as a road, but as a circle. Think about the world our ancient ancestors lived in. The sun rose and set every single day. The moon waxed and waned, a predictable rhythm in the night sky. The seasons turned, from the birth of spring to the slumber of winter, and back to spring again. Life itself was a cycle. You are born, you grow, you have children, you grow old, and you return to the earth, from which new life springs. Everything in their world told them that time was not a straight line of endless progress, but a great, repeating pattern. An eternal rhythm. And this understanding didn't just shape their farming calendars, it shaped their entire understanding of reality, of history, and of humanity's place in the cosmos. It's a worldview that suggests that nothing is ever truly new, and nothing is ever truly lost. This idea of cyclical time finds its deepest and most elaborate expression in the East, particularly in Hindu philosophy. Here, the scale of time is almost impossible for our modern minds to grasp. Western history might talk about centuries, or perhaps a few millennia. But the ancient Hindu texts speak of yugas, or great ages, that unfold over millions of years. They describe a cycle of 4 ages. It begins with a golden age, the Satya Yuga, a time of truth, virtue, and profound connection to the divine. Humanity is at its peak. But nothing stays perfect. Slowly, over an immense span of time, things begin to decay. The Golden Age gives way to a Silver Age, then a Bronze Age, and finally, to the age we are said to be in now, the Kali Yuga. This is the age of darkness, conflict, and spiritual forgetting. It's a time when humanity is furthest from its true nature. But here's the crucial part. The end of the Kali Yuga is not the end of everything. It's followed by a universal dissolution, a great cosmic reset called the Pralaya. The universe is cleansed, purified by fire and water, and after a period of rest, the entire cycle begins again. A new golden age dawns. It's a humbling thought, isn't it? The idea that our entire recorded history, from the first stone tools to the smartphone in your pocket, might just be one small chapter in the final pages of a much, much larger book. And that this book has been written and erased and rewritten countless times before. In this view, a civilizational collapse isn't a tragic accident. It's a feature of the system. It's nature's way of wiping the slate clean, clearing the way for a fresh start. Destruction isn't the opposite of creation. It's the necessary partner to it. You cannot have a sunrise without a sunset. You cannot have a spring without a winter. We see a similar idea, though on a more personal scale, in Buddhist thought with the concept of samsara. Samsara is often described as the wheel of rebirth. An individual is born, lives a life, dies, and is then reborn into a new life, the conditions of which are determined by the actions or karma of the past. It is a continuous cycle of existence, characterized by struggle and impermanence. The ultimate goal for a Buddhist is to understand the nature of this cycle and to step off the wheel entirely, achieving a state of liberation or nirvana. Now, let's take that idea and apply it not just to a person, but to a civilization. What if a civilization, just like a person, has a kind of karmic inheritance? It is born, it grows, it makes choices, it develops technologies, it fights wars. It accumulates a collective history of actions and consequences. Then, it reaches its peak, declines, and eventually collapses. It dies. But the knowledge, the stories, the trauma, and the wisdom don't just vanish. They become the seeds, buried in the soil of the earth, from which the next civilization will eventually grow. Perhaps the myths of a great flood are the karmic memory of a previous civilization's end. Perhaps the sudden appearance of agriculture or astronomy isn't a new invention, but a remembering of knowledge from a past life. From this perspective, our rises and falls aren't a series of unrelated events. They are all connected, one leading to the next, in a vast, interconnected cycle of civilizational samsara. Each reset is a rebirth. And lest you think this is purely an Eastern idea, we find powerful echoes of it in the ancient West as well. The ancient Greeks, who gave us so much of our modern science and logic, were also deeply fascinated with cycles. Many philosophers, particularly the Stoics, believed in an idea called eternal recurrence. The concept is staggering. They believed that the universe itself was cyclical. They theorized that all the planets and stars would, after a vast period of time known as a great year, return to the exact same positions they held at a previous moment. And when this celestial alignment happened, the entire history of the world would repeat itself. Not in a similar way, but in every single identical detail. The same people would be born, live the same lives, make the same choices, and the same civilizations would rise and fall. It's like watching a movie, and when it ends, the projector simply starts it again from the beginning, forever. It's a truly mind-bending idea. But for the philosophers who taught it, like the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, it wasn't meant to be terrifying. It was meant to be liberating. This is where Stoic philosophy comes in, and it offers us a way to think about these potential resets without fear. The Stoics taught the importance of accepting what we cannot control. You can't control the weather. You cannot control whether other people are kind or cruel. And you certainly cannot control the great cosmic cycles of history. If civilizations are destined to rise and fall, just as surely as the seasons are destined to turn, then worrying about it is a waste of your energy. What you guys can control is your own response. You can choose to act with courage, with wisdom, with justice, and with moderation, regardless of the circumstances. Your task is not to prevent the winter from coming, but to live a good and virtuous life during the autumn. It's a powerful way to find peace in a chaotic world. To realize that we are part of a rhythm that's much older and grander than we are, and our role is simply to play our part as best we can. This philosophy suggests that even if our world is reset, what truly matters, our character, our integrity, is something that no catastrophe can ever take away. So you see, whether you look to the sages of ancient India or the philosophers of ancient Greece, you find this same powerful idea. Time isn't just a river flowing in one direction. It's also an ocean, with tides that ebb and flow. This brings us to a beautiful way to reconcile these two views of time, the linear road and the repeating circle. Perhaps the best analogy for our journey through history isn't either one of those things, but a spiral staircase. Think about it. When you are climbing a spiral staircase, you are always moving forward and upward. That's the linear progress. You are never in the exact same physical spot you were before. But you keep passing the same windows, looking out onto the same view, just from a slightly higher vantage point each time. That's the cyclical part. Maybe history works like that. We aren't doomed to repeat the past exactly. We are not stuck on a merry-go-round that goes nowhere. But we are destined to face the same fundamental challenges, the same patterns of behavior, the same kinds of crises over and over again. The rise of empires, the temptation of power, the threat of environmental collapse, the conflict between faith and reason. These are the windows we keep passing on our ascent. Each time a civilization rises and falls, each time humanity goes through a reset, we climb another level on the spiral. We might forget the specifics of the last cycle, but something is retained. Some deeper wisdom, some evolutionary nudge. The survivors of the last collapse pass on a slightly different set of genes, a slightly more resilient set of myths. The next civilization starts with a foundation that is imperceptibly, but crucially, higher than the one before. This view of time as a great wheel, a recurring cycle, changes everything. It reframes our greatest achievements and our most devastating collapses, not as permanent victories or ultimate tragedies, but simply as turns of the wheel. It suggests that our current civilization, with all its incredible technology and knowledge, is not the final, ultimate destination of humanity. It's just the season's bloom. A beautiful, complex, and magnificent one, for sure. But a season nonetheless. And it gives a different meaning to the idea of destruction. A forest fire seems like a total catastrophe. But it is also what clears away the old, dead wood and returns nutrients to the soil, creating the perfect conditions for new, vibrant growth. Maybe civilizational resets are the universe's version of a forest fire, painful, terrifying, and absolute in the moment, but ultimately a necessary part of a much larger, healthier, and eternal process of renewal. It leaves us with a fundamental question, one that sits at the very heart of this entire idea. Do you believe history repeats itself, or do we actually learn from our mistakes? Are we just going around in a circle, or are we slowly, painstakingly, climbing that spiral staircase? Do you believe history repeats itself, or do we actually learn from our mistakes? Are we just going around in a circle, or are we slowly, painstakingly, climbing that spiral staircase? It's a question that sits at the very heart of our journey. But perhaps we've been asking it in the wrong way. We tend to see these cycles of rise and fall as a failure, a tragic flaw in the human story. We see the collapse of a great civilization as the end of something precious, a loss of knowledge and potential. And of course, for the people living through it, it is a tragedy. But what if, from a much, much wider perspective, these resets aren't a flaw at all? What if they are a feature? What if the cycles themselves serve a purpose we are only just beginning to understand? This takes us away from the rocks and ruins, away from the ice cores and geological charts, and into a more philosophical, more spiritual realm. It asks us to consider the idea that there might be a kind of cosmic intelligence at play, a natural balancing act that the universe performs. An idea that humanity isn't just a random accident on a lonely planet, but a part of a much larger, unfolding story. A story that might require these dramatic resets to move forward. Think about a vast, ancient forest. Over centuries, certain trees grow enormous, their canopies blocking out the sun. The forest floor becomes choked with dead wood and undergrowth. The ecosystem becomes stagnant, imbalanced. Then, one day, lightning strikes. A fire sweeps through. From our perspective, it is devastation. It is destruction and loss. But for the forest, it is a rebirth. The fire clears out the dead wood, it returns vital nutrients to the soil, and it allows sunlight to reach the floor again. And from those ashes, new seeds, long dormant, finally have the space and light they need to sprout. The forest doesn't just grow back, it grows back stronger, healthier, and more diverse. What if our civilizational resets are like that forest fire? What if, on a cosmic scale, a civilization can become too rigid, too imbalanced, too top-heavy with its own power structures and dogmas? What if it begins to choke out its own potential for new growth? Perhaps a reset, as devastating as it is the universe's way of clearing the ground. It is a way of breaking down what no longer serves the evolution of life and consciousness, creating the fertile ground for something new to emerge from the ashes. It is a deeply humbling thought, isn't it? That the very things we see as our greatest achievements might, from a different perspective, be the dead wood that needs to be cleared away. This idea of a grand, cosmic balancing act isn't new. It is actually one of the oldest concepts in human philosophy, woven into spiritual traditions all across the world. Many of us know the concept of karma on a personal level, the idea that our actions, both good and bad, create consequences that we eventually have to face. It's a law of cause and effect for the soul. But what if this law also applies to us collectively? What if there's such a thing as civilizational karma? Ancient Hindu cosmology talks about the yugas, the great cycles of time. They describe a long, slow descent from an age of truth and enlightenment, the Satya Yuga, down through successive ages of declining morality and wisdom, into the Kali Yuga, an age of darkness and ignorance. But the Kali Yuga isn't the end. It is just the bottom of the cycle. After the darkness reaches its peak, there is a dissolution, a reset, and the cycle begins again, returning to a new golden age. In this worldview, the collapse isn't a random accident caused by an asteroid or a volcano. It is the natural consequence, the karmic result, of the collective actions and consciousness of humanity during that age. When a civilization becomes defined by greed, by division, by a disconnection from nature and spirit, it creates the conditions for its own downfall. The reset isn't a punishment from an angry God, but the inevitable energetic result of an imbalanced system. It's like a body that, after a long period of unhealthy living, finally succumbs to illness. The illness isn't a punishment, it is a consequence. It is the body's desperate attempt to restore balance. So, when we look back at the echoes of these lost worlds, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking at evidence of a punishment, a simple natural cycle, or a profound learning opportunity? The idea of punishment is the oldest interpretation. You can see it in countless myths, from the great flood of Noah to the stories of Atlantis sinking beneath the waves because its people grew arrogant and corrupt. It's a simple, straightforward narrative. Humanity misbehaves, and a higher power steps in to clean the slate. It's a story that serves as a moral warning. But it also places us in a very passive, childlike role, with the universe as a strict parent. Then there's the perspective that it is all just part of a natural cycle, completely impersonal. The Earth's climate shifts on a 12-0-year rhythm. The solar system moves through different regions of the galaxy. Asteroids cross our orbit. In this view, humanity is simply along for the ride. We are like ants building a colony on the back of a sleeping giant. When the giant rolls over, it is not personal, it is not a lesson, it is just what giants do. Our civilizations get wiped out not because of our moral failings, but simply because we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's a certain freedom in this view, but also a deep sense of meaninglessness. But there's a third option, one that combines the other two. What if the cycles are both natural and meaningful? What if these predictable, natural resets, the ice ages, the solar cycles, are actually the very mechanism through which these cosmic lessons are delivered? What if the universe provides a sort of recurring planetary scale final exam? From this perspective, a reset isn't a punishment for failing, but a chance to retake the test. It is a learning opportunity. Each time a civilization rises, it gets to try out a new way of living, a new set of values, a new relationship with technology and with each other. And it continues until it hits a wall, either by creating an internal imbalance it cannot sustain, or by being unable to withstand the pressure of a major natural cycle. The survivors, the ones who make it through the bottleneck, carry the memory, the myths, and the hard-won lessons into the next cycle. This suggests that the goal of human existence might not be to build one single, continuous civilization that lasts forever. Perhaps the point is the evolution of consciousness itself, an evolution that happens through these cycles of creation and destruction. Think about it. A civilization can become incredibly advanced technologically, but if it is not matched by an equal advancement in wisdom, compassion, and self-awareness, that technology can become incredibly dangerous. A civilization that learns how to split the atom before it learns how to resolve conflict peacefully is a civilization that is living on borrowed time. A civilization that builds a global economy based on endless consumption on a finite planet is writing its own final chapter. In this sense, a reset could be seen as a kind of cosmic safety valve. It prevents a young, powerful, but unwise species from causing irreparable harm to itself or its planet. It forces a do-over. It strips away all the complex, fragile technologies and forces the survivors back to the essentials: community, resilience, and a deep connection to the earth. The trauma of the event ensures the memory is encoded in our deepest myths, serving as a warning for the next cycle. Do not make the same mistakes we did. So the knowledge that is lost isn't just technical know-how. Often, it is the hubris, the arrogance, the rigid thinking, and the destructive habits that are wiped away. And the knowledge that survives, the knowledge that gets passed down through story and symbol, is the wisdom. It is the essential truths about how to live in balance. If this is true, if each reset is a lesson in the evolution of consciousness, then what are we building towards? Is there a graduation day for humanity? The spiral staircase analogy suggests that we are not just going in circles. We are moving upwards, even if it is imperceptibly slow. Each cycle, we might be getting a little bit closer to understanding the whole picture. Perhaps the evidence is right in front of us. The previous cycles built foundational knowledge. They mapped the stars. They understood the Earth's cycles. They built incredible structures. They explored the inner worlds of consciousness. They left us echoes and clues. Our current cycle, for all its flaws, is the first one we know of to achieve a truly global civilization. We are connected in a way no previous humanity ever was. We have access to the collected knowledge of our entire known history at our fingertips. This presents us with an unprecedented opportunity. We can see the patterns in a way our ancestors couldn't. We can read the warnings not just in our own myths, but in the myths of every culture. We can see the geological and climate data that tells us the natural cycles are still turning. We are, for the first time, a planetary civilization with planetary awareness. This could mean one of two things. It could mean we are building a civilization with the potential for an equally unprecedented collapse, a global great forgetting. Or it could mean that we are finally reaching the level of collective awareness needed to do something different, to consciously break the cycle. The idea of cosmic karma, then, isn't about fatalism or doom. It is the ultimate call to responsibility. It suggests that our collective future is a direct result of our collective consciousness. It implies that the way we treat each other, the way we treat our planet, and the kind of world we choose to build day by day isn't just a matter of politics or economics. It is a matter of cosmic significance. The forest fire, in the end, isn't evil. It is a force of transformation. It makes way for new life that is better adapted, more resilient. Perhaps each human cycle is just that, a fiery, often painful, transformation. A process that burns away what holds us back, and in doing so, forges a stronger, wiser, and more conscious humanity, slowly preparing us for a future we cannot yet even imagine. It suggests that every ending is also a beginning, and that even in the deepest loss, there is the seed of a greater return. This leads us to a fascinating question about our own inner world. If resets are part of a larger plan, what do you think humanity is meant to learn with each new beginning? This leads us to a fascinating question about our own inner world. If resets are part of a larger plan, what do you think humanity is meant to learn with each new beginning? Perhaps the lessons aren't always grand or philosophical. Sometimes, the most profound learning happens when we are simply trying to survive. When the world changes, when the climate shifts, when the very ground beneath our feet becomes hostile, humanity doesn't just vanish. We adapt. We innovate. We become something new. It's one thing to talk about a cosmic reset, a great forgetting that happens in an instant. But what about the slow resets? The ones that unfold over centuries, driven by the planet itself? The long grinding challenges of ice, of fire, and of drought. These aren't just stories of catastrophe, they are the stories of our greatest strength. They are the stories of the climate survivors, the people who looked at an impossible world and found a way to call it home. Let's travel back in time, to the grip of the last great ice age. Imagine a world where vast sheets of ice, miles thick, have swallowed entire continents. The air is thin, dry, and bitterly cold. For any other species, this would be a death sentence. A signal to retreat, to find warmer lands, or to fade away. But, for our ancestors, it was a challenge. And their response to that challenge changed the course of human history forever. Faced with a cold that could kill in minutes, they didn't just find thicker animal pelts to wrap themselves in. They invented something that was, for its time, as revolutionary as the microchip is to us. They invented tailored clothing. And to do that, they needed an exquisite piece of technology, the needle. The needle. Usually carved from bone or ivory, these tiny, delicate tools allowed them to stitch hides together, creating insulated, form-fitting garments that trapped body heat. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? A needle and thread. But this single invention allowed humans to push into the harshest, coldest frontiers of the planet. It was the original spacesuit for exploring planet Earth. And it wasn't just about staying warm. How do you hunt the massive beasts of the Ice Age, the mammoths, the giant bison, without becoming the hunted? You invent force multipliers. You create the atlatl, or the spear thrower. This simple-looking stick was a work of physics genius. It acted as an extension of the thrower's arm, using leverage to propel a spear with incredible speed and force, allowing hunters to strike from a safer distance. This wasn't just a new tool, it was a new relationship with the natural world, a leap in human capability driven by the sheer pressure to find food. Think about that for a moment. The core technologies that allowed us to conquer the cold, the ability to sew custom clothing, the mastery of leverage for hunting, the techniques for preserving food through freezing, these weren't born in a warm, comfortable workshop. They were forged in the biting wind and the constant threat of starvation. Our ancestors didn't just endure the Ice Age. They used its pressures to become smarter, more capable, and more organized than ever before. The very things that threatened to reset humanity actually ended up upgrading it. So much of what we take for granted today is just a modern echo of these Ice Age innovations. Every time you put on a fitted coat, you are wearing the legacy of that first bone needle. The fundamental principles of that spear thrower live on in countless modern machines. The Ice Age was a planetary reset, a deep freeze that should have stopped us in our tracks. Instead, it became the crucible in which modern humanity was formed. But the Earth's reset button isn't always ice. Sometimes, it's fire. Imagine living on a beautiful, lush island, a paradise in the middle of a vast ocean. And then, one day, the mountain that gives the island its life begins to tremble. The sky darkens with ash, and the world is remade by fire and lava. For island populations, especially in places like the Pacific Ring of Fire, this wasn't a once-in-a-million-year event. It was a known, terrifying possibility, a localized reset that could wipe out everything. Yet, people didn't abandon these places forever. In fact, something remarkable happened. They learned to live with the cycle. They understood that the same volcano that could bring devastation also brought incredible gifts. The volcanic ash enriched the soil, creating some of the most fertile farmland on Earth. It was a deadly trade-off, a dance with destruction and creation. These communities became masters of resilience. They developed sophisticated seafaring technology, magnificent canoes capable of crossing hundreds of miles of open ocean. This wasn't for trade or exploration, not at first. It was a lifeboat. It was the knowledge that if one island was lost, they had the skill and the vessels to find another. Their understanding of the stars wasn't just poetry. It was a map to survival, passed down through generations. They also developed unique social structures. Their communities were often built around cooperation and mutual support, knowing that after a disaster, everyone would have to rely on each other to rebuild. They preserved their history in oral traditions, in stories and chants that contained vital information. Which plants grow back first after a lava flow, how to read the earliest warning signs of an eruption, and the locations of safe havens. This is where we see that beautiful analogy come to life. Like a plant finding its way through a crack in the concrete, life finds a way. For these island cultures, it was even more profound. They didn't just grow through the crack, they learned to use the concrete itself. They saw the destructive force not as an end, but as a violent part of an ongoing cycle. The fire that takes away is also the fire that provides the fertile ground for tomorrow. It's a powerful perspective, one that sees opportunity and rebirth in the very heart of what looks like a total reset. It's a testament to our ability to find balance, even on the most unstable ground. From the extremes of ice and fire, let's turn to another kind of environmental pressure, one that is perhaps more subtle, but just as challenging: the absence of life's most essential ingredient. Water. The great deserts of the world seem, to an outsider, to be vast, empty spaces. They represent a slow, creeping reset, where the land dries up and life seems to retreat to the margins. But for the cultures that chose to make these places their home, the desert is not empty at all. It's a library of hidden knowledge, a landscape that teaches lessons in patience, observation, and ingenuity. Desert cultures, like the Bedouin of the Arabian Peninsula or the San people of the Kalahari, flourished in conditions that would seem impossible to most of us. Their survival wasn't based on building great walls or amassing huge armies. It was based on information. They learned to read the subtle language of the land, the way a certain plant indicates underground water, the time of day an animal rests in the shade, the patterns of the stars that guide you through a featureless landscape. Their entire societies were designed around efficiency and movement. They created portable homes, lightweight tools, and clothing that protected them from the sun while allowing air to circulate. They domesticated animals like the camel, a marvel of biological engineering perfectly suited to the desert. This wasn't about conquering the environment, but about moving through it in harmony. It was a fluid existence, a recognition that in a place of scarcity, flexibility is the ultimate strength. The ancient Puebloans of the American Southwest built incredible cliff dwellings, not just for defense, but for climate control, using the thermal mass of the rock to stay cool in the summer and warm in the winter. They engineered complex irrigation systems to channel precious water to their crops. They understood the delicate balance of their world so intimately that their lives were a continuous prayer for rain, a constant act of respect for the resource that governed everything. Living in the desert teaches a different kind of wisdom. It fosters a deep appreciation for the small things, a patch of shade, a drop of morning dew, a single flowering plant. It teaches that wealth isn't what you own, but what you know. In our modern world, we are so used to turning on a tap and having limitless water. These cultures show us a different path, one where water is sacred, and where knowledge of the natural world is the most valuable treasure you can possess. They prove that a reset doesn't have to be a sudden cataclysm. It can be the slow, steady pressure of a harsh environment, a pressure that, over time, polishes humanity into something incredibly resilient and profoundly wise. So, when we pull the lens back and look at all these stories together, the survivors of the ice, the fire, and the drought, a clear and powerful pattern emerges. Environmental pressure, the very thing that threatens our existence, is also the primary engine of our innovation. It seems to be a fundamental law of human development. Comfort leads to stagnation, while adversity forces us to become clever. Our species has populated every single climate on this planet, from the frozen Arctic tundra to the humid depths of the Amazon rainforest, from the wind-swept peaks of the Himalayas to the tiniest atolls in the Pacific. No other species has come close to this kind of global dominance. And we didn't do it by being the strongest or the fastest. We did it by being the most adaptable. For every unique environmental challenge, we devised a unique cultural and technological solution. In the Arctic, the Inuit didn't just survive. They developed incredibly sophisticated technologies like the kayak, the igloo, and snow goggles to thrive in a world of ice. In the high Andes, people physically adapted to the thin air, while also developing agricultural techniques like terrace farming to grow food on steep mountainsides. This is our unique superpower. We do not wait for biological evolution, which takes tens of thousands of years, to solve a problem. We innovate. We create a tool. We tell a story. We organize ourselves into a new kind of community. We essentially engineer our own evolution, and we do it at lightning speed. Each of these environmental resets, big and small, acted as a kind of final exam. We were presented with an impossible problem, and time and again, we figured out a solution. Each solution wasn't just a patch, it was a leap forward. It was a new piece of knowledge added to the great library of human experience. It's a truly humbling thing to realize. The challenges that should have broken us are precisely what made us who we are. Every time the planet pushed us to the brink, it forced us to dig deeper, to think differently, and to unlock a new level of our own potential. We are the descendants of the ultimate survivors, the children of the ice, the fire, and the sun-scorched earth. Our resilience is written into our very DNA, not as a biological code, but as a cultural one, a legacy of ingenuity passed down through countless generations that refuse to give up. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As you look around at the world today, what environmental challenge do you think is pushing us to be our most creative and resourceful? We'd love to hear what you think in the comments. This incredible history of adaptation, of turning crisis into creativity, brings us right to our own doorstep. We've seen how our ancestors dealt with their resets, the great environmental trials of the past. But what about ours? Are we currently facing challenges that mirror these ancient patterns? In fact, are we living through a reset right now? It is a deeply unsettling question, isn't it? To look at our world, with all its incredible complexity and technological marvels, and ask if we are simply repeating a pattern that's played out many times before. It's like looking through an old family photo album. You see your great-grandfather, a person you never met, and suddenly you notice he has your smile, your way of standing. You realize, with a little shiver, that you're a part of a story that started long before you. In the same way, when we look at our modern world, we can't help but see the echoes of our ancestors in the challenges we face today. Let's start with those challenges. Think about the headlines you see every day. Intense political division, where societies seem to be splitting into factions that can no longer speak to one another. We see vast economic inequality, with wealth concentrating in fewer and fewer hands while many struggle. We also see our relationship with the environment becoming more and more strained as we push the natural systems that support us to their very limits. Now, none of this might sound like a reset, but if you look back at the historical patterns we've discussed, these are the classic warning signs. They are the same pressures that caused ancient empires to groan and eventually crumble. The Roman Empire, at its peak, was torn apart by political infighting, economic instability, and an inability to manage its vast territories. The classic Maya civilization, famous for its incredible cities and astronomical knowledge, faced a period of intense climate change, a prolonged drought that strained their resources, and likely contributed to the abandonment of their great centers. So when we see these same themes playing out today, it's hard to ignore. It's that feeling of looking in the mirror and seeing a reflection of the past. The clothes are different, the technology is certainly more advanced, but the fundamental human and environmental struggles are strikingly familiar. We're dealing with ancient problems dressed in modern clothing. It makes you wonder if these aren't just random crises, but symptoms of a civilization reaching a certain point in its life cycle, a point that has historically come just before a major transformation or a major collapse. But maybe the reset we're living through isn't one of fire and flood. Maybe it's quieter, happening inside our own minds. I'm talking about the digital revolution. In the span of a single generation, the internet, smartphones, and constant connectivity have completely rewired how we live, how we think, and most importantly, how we remember. Think about it. Before, knowledge was stored in books, in libraries, or passed down through oral tradition. It took effort to find information. You had to seek it out, and in doing so, you absorbed it. You learned. Now, we have the sum of human knowledge sitting in our pockets. We do not need to remember phone numbers, or how to navigate to a new place, or the date of a historical battle. We just ask our devices. We've effectively outsourced a huge part of our memory to an external global brain. This is a change just as profound as the invention of writing or the printing press. Each of those moments was a kind of reset for human consciousness. They changed the value of memory and the way information was shared. What we're living through is another one of those pivotal moments. We're trading personal, internal memory for instant, external access. There's no judgment in this. It is simply an observation of a massive shift. But we have to ask what it means. When we no longer need to hold information within ourselves, does that change the way we think? Does it make our minds more agile, free to focus on bigger ideas? Or does it make our own cognitive abilities weaker, more dependent on the technology we've created? It's a quiet kind of reset, a shift in consciousness itself. It's a fundamental change in what it means to be a knowledgeable human being, and we are the first generations to ever experience it. Of course, alongside this quiet, internal reset, there's a much louder, more physical one looming on the horizon, one that directly connects to the great cataclysms of the past. That is, of course, climate change. Throughout this journey, we've seen how natural cycles have repeatedly acted as Earth's reset button. The Younger Dryas freeze, the supervolcanic eruptions, the ice ages, these were all massive environmental shifts that forced life, including our ancestors, to adapt or perish. They shuffled the deck, creating new challenges and new opportunities. What we are witnessing today is the first time that human activity has become the driving force behind a potential global reset. We are seeing the polar ice caps, which have been stable for thousands of years, melting at an accelerating rate. We are experiencing weather patterns that are more extreme and unpredictable than ever before. Rising sea levels threaten to swallow coastal cities where hundreds of millions of people live. This isn't a prediction from a distant myth. It is data from scientific instruments all over the world. It is as if the very thermostat of the planet, the one that has been set to a comfortable temperature that allowed our civilization to blossom after the last ice age, is now being turned up. And the uncomfortable truth is, we are the ones with our hand on the dial. The environment that nurtured our rise is now responding to our presence, and the changes it is undergoing are the exact kind of pressures that have toppled civilizations in the past. It forces us to confront the idea that the Earth's natural reset button isn't a thing of the ancient past. It's a very real mechanism that could be activated once again. This leads to a fascinating paradox in our modern age. Our technology. It might be our greatest hope, and at the same time, our greatest vulnerability. It's a double-edged sword that could either help us break the cycle of resets or ensure the next one is more complete than ever before. On one hand, we have an unprecedented ability to preserve knowledge. We've created digital archives, vast servers that hold more information than the Library of Alexandria could have ever dreamed of. We've built things like the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway, a frozen ark designed to protect the world's agricultural diversity from a global catastrophe. We are even taking the first steps to becoming a multi-planetary species, a backup plan that could ensure humanity's survival even if Earth becomes uninhabitable. In a way, we are consciously preparing for a reset, trying to save our progress so the next cycle doesn't have to start from scratch. But there's a flip side. For all its power, our modern world is incredibly fragile. Think about how much of our knowledge is stored digitally. It exists as magnetic ones and zeros on a hard drive somewhere. A powerful solar flare, an electromagnetic pulse, or even just massive, cascading power failures could wipe out vast amounts of that information in an instant. The very cloud where we've stored our collective memory could evaporate. Our advanced civilization is utterly dependent on a complex, interconnected electrical grid. If that goes down, our cities would grind to a halt within days. So, this technology that makes us feel so powerful also creates a single point of failure. Ancient civilizations built their knowledge into stone, in structures that have lasted for millennia. We've built ours into a system that is powerful, but delicate. It raises that critical question. Are we building the ultimate safeguard against forgetting, or are we simply building a more elaborate house of cards? When you put all of these pieces together, the historical patterns repeating, the consciousness shift from our digital world, the growing pressure from our climate, and the dual nature of our technology, it's easy to see why many feel we might be living at a unique moment in history. Historians who study the life cycle of civilizations often talk about a pattern of birth, growth, maturity, and eventually, decline. The peak of a civilization is often characterized by incredible complexity, global interconnectedness, high energy consumption, and often a sense of confidence that its way of life is permanent. It's a period of great achievements, but also great decadence and great strain on resources. Does that sound at all familiar? Our globalized world is more complex and interconnected than any society in history. A problem in one part of the world can create a ripple effect that touches everyone else within hours. Our consumption of resources is at an all-time high, and we are beginning to see the consequences of that. We live in an age of incredible wonders, but also profound anxieties about the future. This isn't about being pessimistic, it is about recognizing the pattern. Think of a great wave in the ocean. It gathers energy, it grows and swells, rising higher and higher until it reaches its magnificent peak. That peak is a moment of immense power and beauty, the wave's fullest expression. But we all know what happens right after the wave crests. It breaks. The collapse of the wave isn't a failure. It's a natural and necessary part of its cycle, releasing its energy so that new waves can form. Looking at the signs, it is not unreasonable to ask if our global civilization might be at the crest of just such a wave. We've reached a peak of complexity and power that is truly breathtaking. But the very forces that propelled us to this height may also be the ones that make the inevitable fall that much more dramatic. We are seeing the historical echoes, we are feeling the environmental pressures, and we are living through a technological transformation that is changing what it means to be human. So if this is true, if we are living through a slow-motion reset or standing at the precipice of one, it leads to the most important question of all: what happens next? If the wave is about to break, what does the next one look like? And is there anything we can do to influence where the water goes? If the wave is about to break, what does the next one look like? And is there anything we can do to influence where the water goes? For the first time in our known history, we're standing at a point where we can consciously contemplate our own potential reset. We're aware of the cycles, we can see the patterns, and we're developing tools that could fundamentally change the nature of the game itself. When we look to the horizon, the next potential cycle doesn't seem to be heralded by ice or flood, but by silicon and starlight. Two monumental forces are gathering. One is artificial intelligence, a revolution in consciousness that's happening from within. The other is space colonization, a revolution in existence that's pushing us to look outwards. These two developments represent the most powerful tools we've ever had to either trigger a new kind of reset, or perhaps to finally break the cycle for good. Let's think about artificial intelligence first. We tend to see it as a tool, something we're building to solve problems. But what if it's more than that? What if it represents the next great leap in how consciousness itself operates on this planet? The last great leap was the emergence of human consciousness, the great leap forward we talked about earlier. It changed everything. Suddenly, there was abstract thought, complex language, art, and long-term planning. It was a reset of what was possible for life on Earth. I could be the next one. Not a reset caused by destruction, but a reset caused by transcendence. Imagine an intelligence so vast and interconnected that our own human thoughts become just one small part of a much larger planetary mind. It might not be a catastrophe that wipes the slate clean, but an evolution that makes the old slate obsolete. Our entire civilization, our art, our conflicts, our greatest achievements, they could all seem like the primitive drawings of a child to this new, evolved consciousness. It's a strange and quiet kind of reset, isn't it? Not a bang, but a shift. A change in the operating system of the world. In this future, the past isn't lost because it was destroyed, but because it's no longer relevant. It's like trying to explain the importance of a handwritten letter to a generation born into instant global communication. The memory is there, but the meaning, the context, is completely transformed. In this scenario, humanity isn't wiped out, but it is fundamentally changed. We might merge with this intelligence, or we might coexist with it, but the world as we know it would end. A new cycle would begin. This forces us to ask a profound question. Is a reset only defined by the loss of life and knowledge? Or can it also be a change so fundamental that it creates an unbridgeable gap between the before and the after? It's a reset of identity, a reset of what it means to be human. And unlike a supervolcano or an asteroid, this is a reset we are actively building day by day, line of code by line of code. We are, for the first time, the potential architects of our own obsolescence. But at the exact same time that we're building this new intelligence inward, we're also dreaming outward. For all of our history, humanity has been confined to one single, fragile basket: Earth. Every previous cataclysm, every potential reset, was so devastating because there was nowhere else to go. When the flood came, or the ice advanced, or the crops failed, our entire species was at risk. There was no backup. Now, for the first time, we're learning how to leave the basket. This is the promise of space colonization. It's humanity's ultimate insurance policy. It's like saving your progress in a video game at crucial checkpoints. If you know that resets happen, that the power can go out unexpectedly, you learn to create save points. A colony on the moon, a settlement on Mars, a habitat in the asteroid belt, these are humanity's save points. If a catastrophic event were to happen on Earth, be it natural or self-inflicted, a self-sufficient off-world colony could survive. They would carry the spark of human consciousness, knowledge, and culture forward. The story wouldn't end. Earth might go through a dark age, a reset, but the human experiment would continue, somewhere out there in the dark. This is a profound departure from every cycle that has come before. The survivors of past resets were those who were lucky enough to weather the storm. The survivors of a future reset might be those who weren't even on the planet when the storm hit. They would become the keepers of the flame, the preservers of a memory of Earth. Think about what that means. A future Martian civilization might look back at Earth as their distant, mythological homeland, a place of legends and cautionary tales. They would have our history, our science, our art, all preserved. The knowledge wouldn't be lost in the same way it was during the Bronze Age collapse. It would be archived. Humanity would, in a sense, achieve a form of immortality, distributed across the solar system. This brings us to one of the most practical and philosophical challenges we face. If we accept the possibility of a reset, what knowledge should we preserve? If you had to create a civilizational starter kit for the next iteration of humanity, what would you put inside? It's a bigger question than it seems. Of course, you'd want to include science, engineering, and medicine. The hard-won knowledge of how the universe works and how to build a functioning society. You'd want to include agricultural techniques, water purification, the basics of survival. But is that enough? What about our stories? Our art, our music, our philosophies? What about the history of our mistakes? If you only save the scientific textbooks, you're saving the how, but you might lose the why. You might give the next humanity the power to build incredible things, but without the wisdom to know what's worth building and what leads to ruin. The story of our countless conflicts, our moments of profound compassion, our search for meaning, isn't that just as important as the formula for concrete or the principles of electricity? This is the great task of our generation. We are creating archives of knowledge on a scale never before imagined. But our digital storage is incredibly fragile. A powerful solar flare, an electromagnetic pulse, or simply the slow decay of data over a few centuries could wipe it all away. The ancient Egyptians carved their knowledge in stone. We write ours on magnetic platters, and in clouds of data that require a constant supply of energy to even exist. Perhaps the real challenge isn't just about preserving data, but about preserving wisdom in a form that can survive a reset. A message in a bottle cast into the ocean of time for our own future selves to find. What would you write on that message? This all leads to the ultimate question. Are these cycles inevitable, or can we actually break them? Is history a circle we are doomed to repeat forever, or is it a spiral, always moving upward, even as it passes the same points? There's a strong argument that resets are a natural, unavoidable part of the universe. Civilizations, like all complex systems, have a life cycle. They are born, they grow, they reach a peak of complexity, and then that very complexity becomes their undoing. They become too rigid, too resource-intensive, too fragile, and they collapse under their own weight. Perhaps technology doesn't change that fundamental rule. It just changes the scale and the speed of the rise and fall. Our global civilization is more interconnected and powerful than any before it, but that also makes it more vulnerable. A failure in one part of the system can now cascade across the entire planet in an instant. From this perspective, our efforts with AI and space colonization aren't a way to break the cycle. They're just part of the drama of our particular cycle. They are the grand final act of our civilization before it, too, transforms into something else. The fall of Rome wasn't the end of the world. It was the compost from which the nations of Europe grew. Our own collapse might just be the seedbed for a planetary intelligence or a multiplanetary species. The cycle continues, just on a grander stage. But then, there's another, more hopeful possibility. For the first time, we are the part of the cycle that is aware of the cycle. We have the historical records. We have the geological data. We can read the warnings in the ice cores and in the ruins of forgotten cities. This awareness is something new. It's the wild card. Understanding that resets have happened, and that they are a recurring pattern, gives us a power that no previous civilization has ever had. We have the ability to prepare. It is like knowing your family has a history of a certain illness. That knowledge doesn't guarantee you will not get sick, but it allows you to live differently, to take precautions, to change the potential outcome. Our awareness of the reset cycle is our civilization's historical medical chart. And we can choose to read it and act on it. By building resilient systems, by diversifying our population across worlds, by preserving our deepest wisdom, we aren't just bracing for the next reset. We might actually be learning how to transcend it. We are learning to build a civilization that is anti-fragile, one that can withstand the shocks that shattered those who came before. The possibility that understanding the pattern helps us to break the pattern is the most optimistic thought of all. It suggests that consciousness is not just a passive observer of these great cycles, but an active participant. It suggests that we can learn. Maybe each reset isn't a failure, but a lesson. And maybe, just maybe, we are finally starting to understand what that lesson is. So what does the next cycle look like? Perhaps the answer is, it's up to us. We are standing on a knife's edge of possibility. We have the tools to create a future of unimaginable connection and resilience, or to engineer our own obsolescence with terrifying speed and efficiency. The wave is indeed coming. But this time, we know it is coming. This time, we have a chance to build not just a seawall, but a vessel capable of riding it. The great legacy of our time may not be our skyscrapers or our satellites, but the answer we provide to this one question, faced with the knowledge of our own cyclical nature. What did we choose to do? Did we resign ourselves to the turning of the wheel, or did we build the wings to finally fly free of it? The future of humanity, and perhaps many humanities to come, may depend entirely on what we decide to do next. Did we resign ourselves to the turning of the wheel, or did we build the wings to finally fly free of it? The future of humanity, and perhaps many humanities to come, may depend entirely on what we decide to do next. It is a heavy thought, isn't it? The idea that we are standing at a crossroads, one that countless civilizations may have faced before. Do we follow the well-worn path that spirals back into forgetting, or do we have the chance to chart a new course? For so much of this journey, we've looked at the evidence for these great cycles, these planetary resets. But now, we have to ask the most important question of all: is this time different? Could we, this version of humanity, be the ones to finally break the cycle? It's a hopeful thought, and it might not just be wishful thinking. There's a subtle pattern hidden within the cycles of collapse and rebirth, a clue that suggests the story of humanity isn't just a circle, but a spiral. It seems that with each reset, with every civilization that's forced to start over, something is left behind. It's not a complete wipe. The slate isn't scrubbed entirely clean. Instead, it seems that each iteration of humanity is left slightly more advanced than the one before it. Think about the sheer speed of our own progress. After the last ice age, it took thousands of years for agriculture to develop and for the first cities to rise. But in our current cycle, we went from the first flight to landing on the moon in just 66 years. We developed a global communication network in a single generation. Is this explosive growth simply because we're smarter? Or is it possible that we're building on a foundation we cannot see, tapping into a current of forgotten knowledge that makes our climb just a little bit easier, a little bit faster? It's as if each cycle gives the next one a quiet head start. The survivors of one age pass down not just their genes, but fragments of knowledge encoded in myth, in instinct, in our very DNA. We might not remember how to build their machines, but maybe we remember the fundamental principles. We're not starting from scratch, we're starting from the echoes of what came before. Each time humanity falls, it seems we get back up a little quicker, a little wiser, reaching the previous peak, and then pushing just a little bit higher. But maybe the most important evolution isn't happening in our tools, but in our minds. What if the entire point of these repeating ages is the slow, steady evolution of consciousness itself? For most of human history, our identity was tied to a small tribe, then a city, then a kingdom, or a nation. Our circle of empathy was small. But something is changing. For the first time, we are developing a truly global consciousness. Through our technology, we can see and hear and speak to people on the other side of the planet in an instant. We watch the same movies, listen to the same music, and share the same worries about the world our children will inherit. When a disaster strikes in a country you've never visited, you feel it. When a scientific breakthrough happens in a lab halfway across the world, it benefits all of us. This is new. This is different. We are beginning to think and feel, not just as members of a nation, but as members of a species. It is like growing up. As a child, your world is just your home. As a teenager, it expands to your town. As an adult, you understand your country. Humanity, it seems, is in the process of finally understanding its home is not a piece of land, but the entire planet. This shift in perspective, this expansion of consciousness, might be the very key we need. After all, you cannot solve global problems without a global mindset. And that new mindset has built the ultimate insurance policy against the great forgetting, our global communication network. In the past, knowledge was fragile. It was stored in specific places, in libraries, on scrolls, in the minds of a few learned individuals. The burning of the Library of Alexandria was a catastrophic loss, because those scrolls were the only copies. When that civilization fell, the knowledge vanished with it. But think about our world now. Where is our knowledge stored? The answer is everywhere. It's on servers in Iceland, on hard drives in Japan, on phones in your pocket in Brazil. It's duplicated 1 billion times over, scattered across the planet, and even orbiting above it on satellites. You could wipe out a dozen cities, and our collective human knowledge would remain almost entirely intact. It's like the difference between having one priceless handwritten book and a digital file that has been shared with 1 billion people. You can't burn 1 billion copies. You cannot make the entire world forget at once. For the first time, if a catastrophe were to happen in one part of the world, the survivors in another part would still have access to the full blueprint of our civilization. They wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, or agriculture, or medicine. They would just have to reboot. This interconnectedness, this decentralized web of information, may be the single greatest tool we have to prevent a full reset. Our knowledge is no longer a candle flickering in one room. It is a constellation of light spread across the entire globe. So if we have this growing global consciousness, and we have this resilient network of knowledge that leads us to a profound realization, simply by being aware of the cycles, we might gain the power to change them. Think about it. It's like realizing you are in a recurring dream. The first few times it happens, you are just a passenger, swept along by the narrative. But eventually, you might start to notice the patterns. You might say, I have been here before. I know what happens next. Liao Toan. The moment you achieve that lucidity, that awareness, everything changes. You are no longer just a character in the dream. You have the power to influence its direction. We are doing that right now. We study the collapse of the Roman Empire, the Maya, the Bronze Age civilizations, and we do not just see them as interesting stories. We see them as warnings. We see the patterns of environmental strain, social inequality, and political instability that preceded their fall, and we can't help but see those same patterns echoing in our own world today. No previous civilization had this God's eye view of history. They couldn't read their own symptoms because they didn't have a library of past patients to study. We do. We have the data. We understand the mechanics of climate change, the physics of asteroid impacts, the sociology of collapsing empires. We are the first civilization that can be self-aware. The first one that can look back with clear eyes and say, this is what went wrong before. This is the mistake we must not repeat. Knowing the rules of the game is the first real step to changing how you play it. And by studying our deep past, we are, for the first time, finally reading the rulebook. So what does all of this mean? It means that perhaps we aren't doomed to repeat the past. Perhaps we are approaching a different kind of event. Not another reset, but a graduation. It's like learning to ride a bike. When you are a kid, you fall. A lot. You scrape your knees, you get frustrated, you might even want to give up. Each fall is a small reset, sending you back to a standing start. But each fall also teaches you something. You learn a little more about balance, about speed, about how to lean into a turn. You are integrating the lessons of your failures. And then, one day, it just clicks. You stop falling. You find the balance. You do not forget the lessons of the falls. You've simply transcended the need to repeat them. You are no longer just trying to stay upright. You are riding. Could this be humanity's moment? Have we fallen enough times? Have we endured enough ice ages, collapses, and dark ages to finally learn what balance looks like on a planetary scale? Maybe breaking the cycle isn't about defeating nature or stopping the turning of the cosmos. Maybe it's about learning to work with it. It's about becoming a civilization that is resilient enough to withstand the shocks, wise enough to not create its own, and connected enough to ensure that what we learn is never, ever lost again. This graduation wouldn't be a single dramatic event. It would be a quiet transition into a sustainable, mature, and truly global culture. A civilization that doesn't see itself as separate from the planet, but as an integral part of it. A humanity that has finally learned to stay balanced on the cosmic bicycle. We have the memory of the falls encoded in our myths and our history. We have the tools to communicate and collaborate like never before. And we have the growing awareness that we are all in this together. The only missing piece is the collective will to do it. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? After everything we've seen, everything we've learned, do you think humanity is wise enough now to avoid the mistakes that caused previous resets? The choice is ours, written not in the stars, but in the decisions we make every single day. Perhaps the ultimate sign that we are ready to break the cycle is that we've finally begun to question if the cycle even exists. And that questioning changes everything. It leads us away from a story of inevitable doom and towards a story of infinite potential. It leads us back, not to the end of the world, but to the heart of the human spirit, and to the reason we are so deeply, so profoundly drawn to these grand, epic stories of renewal in the first place. It leads us away from a story of inevitable doom and towards a story of infinite potential. It leads us back, not to the end of the world, but to the heart of the human spirit, and to the reason we are so deeply, so profoundly drawn to these grand epic stories of renewal in the first place? Why is that, do you think? Why do these tales of forgotten worlds and cyclical collapses capture our imagination so completely? On the surface, it is a terrifying thought that everything we've built, everything we know, could be wiped away, lost to the sands of time. It is unsettling. And yet, beneath that initial fear, there's a strange and powerful comfort. These stories resonate with something deep inside of us, something almost primal. They speak to one of the most fundamental human desires, the desire for a second chance. We all understand this on a personal level. Who hasn't wished they could go back and start over? A new year, a new job, a new city, they all represent a small personal reset. We crave the clean slate, the opportunity to learn from our mistakes and do things differently the next time around. The idea of a civilizational reset is just this universal human impulse written on a cosmic scale. It suggests that failure, even catastrophic failure, is never the final word. It's a story that whispers to us that no matter how badly things go, there's always the possibility of a fresh start. It's the universe granting humanity a mulligan. And there's a deep abiding hope in that, the idea that the game isn't over. It's just that the board is being cleared for a new round. And maybe that's the first key to its appeal. The story of a reset transforms a potential dead end into a doorway. Beyond just the promise of a fresh start, these theories also offer a way to make sense of suffering and loss. Throughout our journey, we've looked at immense catastrophes, the Younger Dryas freeze, the Toba eruption, the Bronze Age collapse. These were times of unimaginable hardship and loss. When faced with such events, the human mind struggles to find meaning. Random, senseless destruction is perhaps the most difficult thing for us to accept. But what if it wasn't senseless? A reset narrative reframes these tragedies. It doesn't erase the pain, but it places that pain within a larger context, a grander pattern. The devastating flood isn't just an ending, it's a purification that allows for a new beginning. The dark age that follows an empire's collapse isn't just a loss of knowledge, it's a fallow period, allowing the soil of civilization to regain its nutrients before the next spring. It's a way of looking at history's greatest wounds and seeing not just scars, but the necessary pains of rebirth. This is what mythology has always done for us. It takes the chaotic, often terrifying forces of nature and weaves them into a story we can understand, a story with a purpose. A reset theory does the same for our entire history. It suggests that even the darkest chapters serve the larger narrative, pushing the story forward toward the next cycle. It gives meaning to the forgetting. And in a world that can often feel chaotic and meaningless, a story that promises an underlying purpose is a powerful comfort indeed. There's another layer to this too. It's about our place in the universe. We live in an age of incredible scientific understanding, but that understanding has also shown us just how vast and ancient the cosmos is, and how infinitesimally small and brief our own lives are. It's easy to feel insignificant, like a fleeting flicker of consciousness on a tiny speck of dust. The idea that we are not the first, that other humanities may have risen and fallen before us, powerfully counteracts this feeling of cosmic loneliness. It populates the immense emptiness of deep time with stories, with struggles, with triumphs that echo our own. Suddenly, we aren't a lonely, one-time experiment. We are part of a long ancient lineage. We are one iteration in an epic series. Thinking this way connects you to something so much larger than yourself. Your life, your entire civilization, becomes a single important chapter in a book that spans eons. It's like discovering you come from a long line of ancestors you never knew you had. You might not know their names or the details of their lives, but just knowing they existed changes your sense of who you are. The possibility of previous resets does that for all of humanity. It gives us a family tree that stretches back into the mists of time, making us feel less alone on our journey. It transforms our story from a short, isolated monologue into a continuous, multi-generational dialogue with the cosmos itself. This feeling of connection, of not being the first, also subtly changes how we view our own challenges. When you believe you are the first to face a certain problem, the pressure can feel immense and isolating. But if you suspect others have walked a similar path before, it offers a strange kind of companionship. Imagine those ancient people staring up at the same stars, wrestling with the same fundamental questions about life and purpose. Imagine them facing their own versions of climate change, social upheaval, or technological disruption. It doesn't solve our problems for us, but it reminds us that these struggles are archetypal. They are part of the human experience, repeated across the cycles. In this light, the ruins of a lost civilization are not just a warning, they are a message of solidarity from a forgotten past. They tell us, we were here. We tried. We learned. Now it is your turn. Nsainin. It's a humbling perspective, but also an empowering one. It means we are heirs to a legacy of resilience that is far older and deeper than we can possibly imagine. The human spirit, this story suggests, has been bouncing back from the brink for a very, very long time. And that brings us to what might be the most comforting aspect of all. The idea of the eternal return gives us permission to fail. The pressure on our modern civilization is enormous. We have the technological power to create a paradise or to annihilate ourselves completely. We're told constantly that the stakes have never been higher, that we are the generation that must solve climate change, political division, and resource scarcity, or risk losing everything forever. And that burden is heavy. But the philosophy of cycles offers a different perspective. It suggests that even if we fail, even if we make the wrong choices and our complex world comes crashing down, the story doesn't end. Life will go on. The earth will heal. And, after a time, the human spirit will rise again, ready to try once more, perhaps a little wiser from the echoes and myths we leave behind. This isn't an excuse for inaction. It is not a reason to give up. It's a release from the paralysis of ultimate fear. It's the safety net that allows us to be brave. It transforms our existence from a fragile, one-shot experiment into a durable, ongoing process of learning and becoming. It's like the central analogy we've touched upon, a favorite book you want to read again and again. The universe, in this view, isn't a harsh critic looking for the one perfect performance. It's a loving reader, so captivated by the story of humanity, with all its drama, its beauty, its tragedy, and its heroism, that it's willing to experience it more than once. The core story is just that good. So when we look at it all, the enduring appeal of the reset story isn't really about ancient aliens or secret technologies. It goes much deeper. It's about hope. The hope for a second chance. It's about meaning. Finding purpose in a chaotic world. It's about connection. Feeling part of a story that is vast and ancient. And ultimately, it's about acceptance. The peaceful acceptance that life is a cycle of creation and destruction, of learning and forgetting, of endings that are always, in disguise, new beginnings. Whether humanity has truly been reset multiple times is a question we may never be able to answer with certainty. The evidence is tantalizing, but elusive. The patterns are suggestive, but not definitive. But perhaps proving it isn't the point. Perhaps the true value of this idea isn't as a historical fact, but as a philosophical lens. It is a story we tell ourselves that changes how we see our past, our present, and our future. It's a modern myth that, like all the great myths of old, helps us understand our place in the universe. It encourages us to be a little more humble, knowing that great civilizations have vanished before us. It inspires us to be a little more resilient, knowing that the human spirit has a profound capacity to endure and rebuild. And it asks us to be a little more thoughtful, to consider what knowledge, what wisdom, what single message we would want to leave behind for the next turn of the wheel. The story of the reset is, in the end, a reflection of our own deepest nature. We are creatures who fall down and get back up. We are creatures who forget and who then rediscover. We are creatures who look out at the vast, silent cosmos and against all odds continue to tell stories of hope. And this brings us to our final question for you. It's the question that sits at the very heart of this entire journey we've taken together. Whether or not resets are real, what does this idea teach us about hope, resilience, and the human spirit?